Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yamin of Revolution. We got a World War III alert. We got a weekend war news. Before I get into that, let's be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we still in the high World War III alert. I think Putin is very upset, tired of playing with these people. Trump backers against the wall. So it's just going to be more war. Let's get right into the content. Salute.
As you may remember, in early November 2025, Putin presented state awards to Russian engineers and scientists who participated in the creation of such unique weapons systems as the Burevestnik cruise missile, the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, the Avangard hypersonic glide vehicle, and the Poseidon nuclear-powered unmanned underwater vehicle.
What's up, brother? Salute.
It is noteworthy that back then, during the award ceremony, Putin made a statement that shocked the whole world. In particular, he officially confirmed that Russian engineers are currently developing new types of weapons that will surpass existing ones in effectiveness and power.
Your business is growing, but your workload is growing faster. You end up running the machine, not the business. That's why we built StoreCloud, the first autonomous.
It is not reported which weapon systems are in question. However, given that the award ceremony was attended by experts in the field of nuclear technology, it becomes clear that Putin was referring to new generation nuclear weapons. It is noteworthy that as soon as Donald Trump was informed about the successful tests of new types of weapons in Russia, he ordered the start of nuclear tests in the United States, leaving the Pentagon generals stumped. The fact is that for several decades now, no one in the world has been conducting full-scale nuclear tests, followed by a nuclear explosion. As for the testing of such new Russian weapons systems as Poseidon and Burevestnik, they are not nuclear, as they were tested without a nuclear charge, and only as delivery vehicles. However, to hide Donald Trump's incompetence, the Pentagon conducted a test launch of a Minuteman III ballistic missile, without a nuclear warhead. It is noteworthy that Russia's response was not long in coming. Just the next day, Vladimir Putin suggested that the Russian military department consider starting the process of preparing to test a new nuclear weapon. With this statement, Vladimir Putin raised the stakes. It is obvious that the Russian president has certain trump cards that he is still hiding from the world. Amid this, a reasonable question arises. What kind of nuclear tests was Putin talking about? And, is it necessary in the 21st century to conduct full-scale nuclear explosions for scientific research? Well, my friends, let's try to answer these questions. So, on July 16, 1945, in the area of Alamogordo, New Mexico, the Americans, for the first time in the history of mankind, conducted a test explosion of an atomic bomb, designated Gadget. And, just a month later, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japanese cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union's response to these actions by the United States followed on August 29, 1949. Back then, at the Semipalatinsk test site in Kazakhstan, the Russians carried out a nuclear test explosion of a 22-kiloton atomic bomb. It was after this that nuclear test explosions began to be carried out on an ongoing basis. These tests not only helped to improve nuclear weapons, but also served as a show of force. However, in recent decades, mankind has completely abandoned such nuclear tests. And there are many reasons for this. The fact is that every such nuclear explosion has its own consequences. Residents of island nations are still flooding the United States with lawsuits, because the Americans have turned their homelands into a testing ground. Over time, public pressure became so strong that the members of the nuclear club decided to completely abandon full-scale nuclear tests. In addition, this was facilitated by the creation of powerful computers that could accurately simulate nuclear explosions and their consequences. Furthermore, the members of the nuclear club were well aware that maintaining test sites and conducting nuclear test explosions require large financial costs. All these factors also played a crucial role in the rejection of full-scale nuclear explosions. By the way, when Trump ordered the Pentagon generals to conduct nuclear tests, it turned out that the main American test site in Nevada had been mothballed since the 90s of the last century, and was not ready to perform such tasks. My dear truth seekers, you must understand that even without full-scale nuclear test explosions, members of the nuclear club are simply obliged to maintain their nuclear warheads in combat condition. To do this, they use not only powerful computers, but also new research methods. In particular, to test old warheads, they take a microscopic dose of a substance from these warheads, and detonate it at an underground test site. This method is called subcritical. This method not only does not violate existing agreements, but also helps to understand whether plutonium has retained its properties. However, this method has its drawbacks. The fact is that only full-scale nuclear test explosions at test sites make it possible to simulate new physical processes and create new types of nuclear weapons. And here is where it gets really interesting. To avoid full-scale nuclear explosions, but at the same time be able to simulate new physical processes, scientists have developed special laser installations that allow creating so-called implosion. This process is similar to what compresses the plutonium core in a nuclear bomb during a real explosion. As a result, scientists receive valuable information about the process of a nuclear explosion without the need to detonate multi-ton atomic bombs. There are such laser installations in the United States, Russia, and China. At the same time, it is worth noting that as of 2026, the world's most powerful laser installation is located in the United States. We are talking about the NIF complex in California. However, this complex has one very big drawback. It is unable to ensure the uniformity of the irradiation of the central capsule, as a result of which the range of experiments of this system is very limited. It is worth noting that Russian scientists have taken into account the experience of their American colleagues. At the moment, Russia is building the most powerful laser installation in mankind's history, which the Americans have already nicknamed the Tsar laser. We are talking about the UFL-2M laser installation, which will receive 192 laser channels for irradiating the target from all sides. At the same time, this Russian laser installation will apply energy twice as powerful as that of the American NIF complex. This will allow Russian scientists not only to simulate the processes in nuclear weapons at a higher quality level, but also to study thermonuclear fusion. As of 2026, the Russian laser installation UFL-2M is 65% complete and already operational. Russian scientists will be able to use the full power of this laser system in 4 years. Simultaneously with this, Russian scientists are working on developing the fastest laser installation in the world, which will make it possible to explode even a vacuum. This installation has been designated XLs. Russian scientists have already created a part of this complex, and started testing it in the laboratories of the National Center for Physics and Mathematics. By 2030, Russia will build 2 laser channels, with a total capacity of 100 petawatts. By this time, the laser system UFL-2M will also be operating at full capacity, resulting in peak power, reaching an exawatt level. This will allow Russia to become the first country in the world to blow up a vacuum, resulting in the emergence of a new science, nuclear photonics. All this will open up new fundamental laws and allow Russian scientists to better understand nuclear processes, as a result of which not only new types of energy and materials will be born, but also new types of nuclear weapons, which in their power and efficiency, will be much superior to existing ones. Moreover, it is reported that current research has already enabled Russian scientists to conduct several successful tests of prototypes of new weapons systems that are many times more powerful and effective than both the Burevestnik cruise missile and the Poseidon nuclear-powered unmanned underwater vehicle.
The breaking news this afternoon. It's 4 o'clock Eastern on Friday as we're doing this live and also taping it. And that is the resignation of Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. She told the president she was resigning because of a recently diagnosed very serious bone cancer in her husband and that he's very ill. President Trump posted on Truth Social, she did a terrific job. But when she testified before the Congress that Iran had not been developing a nuclear weapon since 2003, he publicly chastised her and said, I don't care what she said. When he kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, she had nothing to do with it and was not involved. And all the buildup to Iran, she was sidelined. She was ordered to conduct a raid or participate in an FBI raid for ballots in Georgia. That's domestic law enforcement, which she's prohibited from being involved in. She's been totally eclipsed by CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Okay, enough from me. Larry, what do we know about the true reason for her resignation?
Well, I think her next job will be she'll get to be a spokeswoman for the Portobello Mushroom Company. Because she spent her entire tenure with Trump getting the mushroom treatment. That means you're kept in the dark and you're covered with what Ray kindly calls male bovine excrement. So the story she put, it is true that her husband is ill, but it is not true that that's what's motivated her to resign. Nobody's made note of the fact that within the last, I think it was at least last 2 weeks, maybe it was a week ago, the daughter-in-law of Robert F. Kennedy, a former CIA officer who was one of her deputies, she resigned. So you got Joe Kent's resigned. Amaryllis, I believe, is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s daughter-in-law, and now Tulsi. So Tulsi's last appearance before Congress was widely reported through leaks to the Washington Post and others, where they gave a very contradictory picture of what the so-called success of Trump's war with Iran has been. In fact, it completely contradicted everything that Trump's been saying. So from that standpoint, Tulsi, to her credit, before she exited, she at least had the temerity to tell the truth to at least members of Congress. This is not an uncommon phenomenon. It's not something unique to Trump. I mean, Ray's seen it in his career as well, where you've got an administration that has a storyline they want to tell. And boy, if the intelligence is so unfortunate as to contradict that storyline, the analysts and their managers are shunted aside, sometimes punished, but the administration plunges on, ignoring what the intelligence says.
If you ever do want to prevent yourself and your private information from being out there on the internet all willy-nilly, and you want to protect your privacy online, then I highly recommend you take a look into
Ray, what's your take? Do we know what the last straw was? Was it Iran in general? Was it the president's lying about the status of negotiations? What pushed her over the edge?
Well, it was very big, as has just been said. That there was unwillingness on Tulsi's part to say there was an imminent threat from Iran. She said, well, that's only for the president to decide. I can't decide that. And she was chastised for that appropriately. But there's one other aspect, and I'm sure Larry would agree with this. She made a big mistake in thinking that she could take on the deep state.
Mm-hmm.
She and Pam Bondi were going to take on James Comey, John Brennan, and all those conspirators who tried to get Trump not elected in 2016. And then when he did get elected, tried to make him a tool of the Russians. The evidence is there in black and white. It was all ready to be used, and she threatened to use it in a very ostentatious way, and nothing happened. Nothing's happened so far. So that was the big deal, it seems to me. She took it on frontally. I was amazed at how she named names and served up the papers that were irrefutably true and should put these guys in prison. Well, I said, will she get away with that? I think the answer is no, she couldn't. And in addition to these other indignities of being shunted aside on substantive matters, that was enough to do her in. I'm surprised she waited so long to resign.
Larry, our former colleague and mutual friend, Catherine Herridge, I think she's now at CNN. She's gone from Fox to CBS to CNN. God bless her. Is reporting that the CIA was monitoring every keystroke on every laptop, desktop, and mobile device of Tulsi Gabbard and her senior people. Is this out of the ordinary that the CIA would spy on its boss? Is she the boss of the CIA?
She's not really the boss of the CIA, even though she sits in a position where she's supposed to oversee the coordination of all the intelligence agencies. But the CIA still retains a lot of latitude. And, spying on the DNI, well, remember John Brennan spied on the Senate for heaven's. So, yeah, this is the CIA is an agency out of control with no accountability. And however, I will note that at least the analysts in the last two briefings to Congress have gone against the administration happy talk about how they've obliterated Iran and Iran has been defeated and all of that nonsense. They've pushed back against that, it's unusual, as Ray knows, in a time of war. And both Ray knew, I think, George Allen much better than I did, but my senior, the instructor for my new analyst course was George Allen. He was the manager that oversaw Sam Adams. He was in charge of the analysis for the Vietnam War during the height of the Vietnam War. And he described the kind of pressure he came under at the time from not only Lyndon Baines Johnson, but from McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, George Bundy, the National Security Advisor. They're all calling him up, telling him to be a team player. Come on, tell the story. Tell what we need, what the policymakers want to hear.
Mm.
And, he admitted at the time that he had two kids in high school. They're getting ready to go to college, and he didn't feel like he could risk, pushing back too hard. Fortunately, he had Sam Adams, Sam, despite his enormous expertise, he spoke the Vietnamese language. He had been on the ground in Vietnam, but he had that kind of money that he was independently wealthy. So you know what? When you got that kind of money in your back pocket, it really helps you to be courageous. And Sam was a courageous man.
I'm thinking of what Tucker Carlson told me when I interviewed him about her, is that she has no money. She doesn't even own the home in which she and her husband live, and that she absolutely needed this job and its income and its benefits.
Yeah.
And for that reason wouldn't resign. Ray, does the CIA spy on the director of the CIA?
Well, not knowingly.
what does that mean? Not
That's what
knowing.
James Clapper answered.
That's Clapper's
He was asked
implementing.
under oath whether whether the NSA and others spy on American citizens.
Right.
Yeah, you can't. No secret is safe. When you put these tools in the hands of your people, you can't be confident that they accept you when they're collecting with this broad brush. So I think it's a problem, but not so much a problem as the fact that they're doing this together with NSA. NSA has the tools, has the more sophisticated intercept tools, and they have a certain charter to be able to intercept messages from Americans as long as there's a foreign source involved. And then, of course, the FBI, and you get them all together in what they call these fusion centers. And then all these rules go kaflooey. I mean, the CIA is not supposed to be in a fusion center collecting stuff on American citizens. So they, of course, give to the local police or to other enforcement agencies what comes out of these fusion centers. And then they have a special kind of trick that they play. It's called, what they do is they collect stuff illegally, and then they give it to the judge, or they give it to not the judge, but they give it to the prosecution. They say, okay, go after so-and-so in this corner on this night. It's and you'll get somebody. Now, that's I can't remember what it's called now, but it's given a
called parallel reconstruction.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
very familiar with that in law enforcement. So
I asked James Comey about that in person before a group of about 300 CIA alumni. I said, how do you explain that? And he said, I'm not familiar with the term.
Oh, God, he certainly is.
And I explained it at that time. And he said, well, after 9/11, we were given special authorities.
Not in the law. Parallel reconstruction, just to be brief, and then I want to jump over to Iran, is where the prosecutor in the courtroom honestly believes the evidence has been acquired lawfully because he has been misled as to its origin. It was actually acquired 4 or 5 steps away from him, and he's ignorant of it, so that he's not lying to a federal judge when he's trying to press the judge on the lawful way the evidence has been acquired. The origin of the evidence was obviously hacking a computer, which is a felony. Larry, are Iran and the United States any closer to an agreement, as the president claimed yesterday, or is he continuing to manipulate the equity and oil markets?
No, they're not closer to an agreement, despite claims to the contrary. I mean, look, Iran's positions that are set in stone, immediate sanction relief, return of frozen assets, and they're going to continue to control the Strait of Hormuz. Those are non-negotiable. The United States now wants to talk nukes, and Iran's made it very clear that they're not talking nukes. It's their sovereign right to enrich uranium, to possess uranium, because they're signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Until such time as anyone can show that they violated that, they're not going to submit to any kind of humiliation ritual from the United States. Now, that said, up to this point, Trump, I think, would have already launched a military attack against Saudi Arabia if it were not for a couple of things. One, the Saudis have prevented the United States from using its airspace. Initially, 3 weeks ago, when they put the kibosh on Project Freedom that was supposed to open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we're on the eve of the Hajj. The Hajj is a religious requirement for all Muslims once in their life to make the travel, the journey to Mecca, and then to engage in a series of rituals that spread out over a 7-day period, in which they basically reenact the life and the holy acts of the Prophet Abraham. Abraham is known in Christian circles, and the Prophet Muhammad. So that starts Sunday.
Does that mean that there will be no violence during that time period?
Well, you mean by the United States attacking? Possibly. Except here's the disturbing, troubling element, data point. One, I know that U.S. military personnel that work in these crisis action teams, they've been told it's a holiday weekend, but you better be prepared to be called into work. That's number one.
Meaning this holiday, meaning the
Yeah, Memorial Day.
or
Memorial
meaning
Day.
the Hajj.
Yes. Well,
Memorial
the
Day.
Hajj and Memorial Day coincide, which may be a tad ironic. But then on top of it, Donald Trump announced today he's missing his son's wedding this weekend because he's got to stay at the White House. That's not a good sign. That indicates that they're seriously contemplating some military action. I mean, he's not staying there because they need to review architectural plans for the greatest ballroom ever to be constructed. No, so this is it's just a question of how much attention is the United States going to pay to Iran. It's military operation. They can continue to conduct attacks on Iran via Iraq. They can overfly Iraq. That increases the risk to them, though, because it narrows the target window for Iranian air defense. But the fact that Trump said he's blowing off going to the wedding and he's staying in Washington, D.C., that's concerning.
Ray, do we know if the White House is receiving accurate analysis from CIA agents?
We know that the Washington Post and the New York Times leaked some of this accurate information. But to listen to Trump saying, there's only 19% of those missiles available to Iran before we went in there, what's left? And of course, CIA is saying, if you can believe what they're telling the Post and the Times, no, it's more like not 17, 18, it's more like 70 or 75% of those missiles. So Trump likes to talk off the top of his head, of course. If he really thinks this, then he's being deprived of the intelligence by a fellow named Rubio, who, as National Security Advisor, as well as Secretary of State, is the funnel through which all information on national security reaches the president. So if Rubio wants Trump not to know something, he can easily prevent it and mislead him in making Trump think that he knows something that isn't true. That's pretty the long and the short of it. I would like to add one thing here about why there's not likely, in my view, to be a renewal of the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. Both Putin personally and Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, have said this is completely unacceptable. Now, their strategic relationship has never been closer and never more visible than over this past week, to the extent that Xi Jinping dispensed with his habits, and as Putin got on the plane, gave him a great big bear hug. Putin, you gotta watch this. Putin wasn't expecting us. I said, "Come here, this way, huh? This way." Well, ironically, before he left, Trump said, "I thought he's going to give me a great big hug." Well, he didn't get a big fat hug, but Putin did, almost as if to show, "Look, we're together. This other entity that doesn't respect the UN or international law, they're all by themselves." And the question is, when they go to the UN today, whether Russia and China will be as one, and whether the US itself will decry the attack on that little college where so many people were killed and injured earlier this morning in Lugansk.
Odometer fraud could cost you thousands, but here's how you can detect it easily. It's easier than ever for sellers and dealerships to roll back the odometers on their cars. And you'll buy that car not knowing that you could get hit with thousands of dollars in repairs and much worse. I was a master mechanic for 10 years, and I'm going to show you how to spot odometer fraud before you buy your next car. Someone in the comments of my last video said they used this device. We're at the dealership right now. We're going to put this to the test and see if it actually works. So,
Larry, about 2 days ago, rumors flew through the internet that there was an agreement for another ceasefire for 30 days all around, including Gaza and Lebanon. Our friend Mohammed Morandi said it's a fake. Don't believe it. Now you are telling us that Trump might be crazy enough to resume a war on an American holiday dedicated to the memory of war dead.
Yeah, very well. You know, again, I agree with Ray that you know, if you look at what Xi and Putin are saying to the United States, that a sane, the caveat here is a sane president would listen, pay heed. But the erratic nature of Donald Trump is such that, in spite of Saudi objections, in spite of even what the military is saying from the standpoint of this is risky and this is difficult, because what, you know, previously when the airstrikes were being launched on Iran, the planes didn't have to fly in just one narrow corridor. They could be spread out along about 1,000-mile front. And over that, it made it very much more difficult for Iran to target those jets. Now, and I have been able to confirm that the U.S. refueling right now is being done principally over Iraq. So that narrows it into a corridor that is much easier to target. And that was what, you know, one of the last KC-135s that were shot down, the air refuelers, did take place over Iraq. So, you know, we can't rule that out. I cannot for the life of me come up with a good explanation why Donald Trump would blow off his son's wedding to say, I got to stay in Washington. What is more important than your son's wedding or the birth of a grandchild? That you say, sorry, I got to, you know, I got to go back and work on my tax return?
All right, let me, this is mind-boggling. Let me switch gears for a minute and talk about Raul Castro. So the CIA engages a terrorist plot to blow up a Cuban airliner, and the same characters years later are flying jets over Cuban airspace. They don't have permission to do it. They're told to turn around. They refuse. They're shot down, just like we would shoot down a plane that entered American airspace. Remember the balloon that taunted everybody until Biden finally shot it down? It taunted the whole country for 10 days. How can that be a crime? I know you're not a lawyer, Ray McGovern, but how can that be the basis for a prosecution when a defense minister is protecting his country from a plane filled with terrorists who refuse to get out of the airspace?
It can be a crime if you have total disrespect for any kind of law, international or domestic. It can be a crime if you want to get rid of the head of Cuba or the principal heads of Cuba, just so that you can strike your breast and say, look, we can do this in our own backyard. Witness what happened in Venezuela. It's the same sequence of events. It looks like they're out to do in the Cuban leadership. Why? Well, because they're a national defense a kind of enemy and a threat to our national defense. Oh, give me a break. Who can believe that? Nobody. So this is Rubio, who's his favorite thing is to make sure the Cubans suffer. And my question here is, with Russia and China giving so much explicit endorsement to a way of following international law and accepting these things that are outside of, not accepting, but getting rid of these things that the U.S. has done, and they list a whole bunch of them, whether they will stand or sit by idly when this happens. There's a special relationship between Russians and the Cubans. This happened before, 1962. I don't know. I think the Russians might be willing to stick their necks out this time, particularly if Big Brother Xi supports the kind of trouble they can cause to get the U.S. to back off on Cuba.
Maybe Raul is already in Moscow, so Trump can't go to Havana and kidnap him. Larry, was it a crime for Barack Obama to use drones to kill Anwar al-Awlaki? Was it a crime for Donald Trump to use drones to kill General Soleimani?
Well, yes, but let me emphasize what's going on here. I've spoken to somebody who was actually involved with that Brothers to the Rescue operation. He described it as a deliberate CIA provocation, that the plane that was shot down didn't carry civilian markings. It actually had U.S. Air Force markings on it.
Jeez.
So it was deliberately trying to entrap the Cubans into doing this, which, they did, and they were justified under international law to do it. I saw firsthand us doing the very similar thing back in 1989 when I was with the Central America branch. The United States had been involved with a year-long covert action against Panama, where we were doing provocation after provocation, trying to get Manuel Noriega to do something, to shoot, kill American soldiers, to attack an American target. We didn't care about the victims. What we were looking for was, excuse me, a predicate that would then justify the United States carrying out an attack on Panama, which ultimately that's what we got. And that's what was going on here with Cuba.
Wow. All right, guys. Thank you very much. It's a holiday weekend. I hope we don't have to reassemble because the president has decided to miss his son's wedding to orchestrate this attack. But if we have to, we'll find you. Thank you very much. I'm a little down on all this, so forgive me. But thank you.
So
is supposed to be going to Florida, and then dramatic scenes where the motorcade is seen rushing back to the Capitol, into the White House, and everybody's like, "Man, the war's going to start tonight." And then it's like, "No, actually, it's not going to start." But there's still negotiations. President Trump wants to give more time for negotiations, and then there's this flurry of activity in the Middle East. All of this stuff going on just in the last few hours. Now, forget about the last 24 hours or overnight. Things are happening even this morning as we're getting ready for show here. So let me try to bring you up to date on where we are. Bottom line is, I think that a lot of claims and talks about negotiations are going on, but I don't believe any of it. I think a lot of people are talking, let me be clear, but I don't think that there's any actual negotiations going on. I think that people are talking past one another left and right and trying to hope against hope that the other side does what they want, but not actually any kind of a negotiations. And to be clear, a negotiation means that you give something to get something. Both sides have to be willing to do that, not one side, both sides. And if both sides aren't, then there are no negotiations. And right now, it looks like that really neither side is willing to give very much. We're going to see some of the details of that as we go on. First of all, let's take a look at something President Trump said, which he's going to be talking kind of about Iran here, also in the context of Venezuela. But underneath, I want you to pay attention to the subtext here, because you're going to see this theme, unfortunately, running throughout this entire show here. You can't get negotiations unless you have some level of trust that the other side will do whatever it agrees to. You don't have to like them at all. That doesn't even have to be part of the equation. You can hate each other, but you have to have some minimal level of trust that each side will do whatever it agrees to. Just consider even the Versailles Treaty that ended World War I. Believe me, there was tremendous amounts of animosity and hatred between the parties there, but at least they got together to make a deal. Of course, it was a bad deal and laid the foundation 25 years later for World War II. The point being that at least among even people that don't like each other, to end that war, they at least had some level of trust that they would do what they said. And for fair period of time, they actually did. Until you get to that point, you're not going to actually have any negotiations. And then you're going to have what's left, which is the likelihood that it ends up back into war. That's the bottom line here at the stop. But in the issue of trust, one of the reasons why the Iranian side doesn't trust us is we've talked about so many times about all the things that we've said, the negotiations that were happening, and then we attack and all that. But even just on basic things, basic elementary truths, there's no truth behind them. And if you see you can't tell the truth on anything, then why will people believe a word that comes out of your mouth on any topic? Case in point, President Trump just last night was addressing, I think it was last night, was addressing a crowd and bragging about how, by the way, all this stuff you've heard about how much we're spending on this war. Turns out we have an extra bank account that somebody else is paying the bill.
Hey, by the way, how did we do in Venezuela? Not bad. That's why he's like, you know, we've taken out so much oil in Venezuela, we paid for the cost of the war about 25 times over. When did you hear that last? You know, it's a one-way street.
Yeah, it's a one-way street. Now, just on the surface of it, who's going to want to listen to that you went into this country and stole their oil, and then you want to have negotiations with another country and think that they're going to believe you? But even more important than that, we have seen that there was about a $200 billion congressional bill that they wanted to pass to pay for all this war so far. $200 billion is what he said. I think that the average is about had been up to the first few portions of the war over $1 billion a day. I think 29 billion was what I heard, what it had physically cost up to that point. Of course, the clock is always ticking because of all these forces deployed. So you pick it, either 29 billion or 200 billion that we were asking Congress for, et cetera. But when you look at our energy chief, Wright, he said, this is back in February. Up to that point, he said that he testified that the U.S. had gotten $1 billion, from Venezuelan oil, and that he hoped to get $5 billion in the coming 3 months. So that was in February, March, April, May. So that would be around now. So if everything he said turned out to be true, and it usually isn't, but let's just give him the benefit of the doubt, that would be $6 billion, not 29, not 200, 6. And that would imply that we are literally taking every dollar from the sale of Venezuelan oil and keeping it, and then applying it into the national treasury to pay off this war here. There's no evidence that that's happening either. In fact, what we've claimed is that we're in a cooperative deal and they get some proportion out of the gracious and the goodness of our heart. We allow them to keep some money from their own resource that we're otherwise stealing. I don't know how the numbers are working out. He hasn't provided any. But even what we do know, there is no truth to what he says. So all the people in that room you saw, all the people in his audience were clapping and cheering. It was great. It was wonderful. We believe every word you say, but they don't matter. What they believe doesn't matter in terms of the war. Now, he will lie to them left and right because the real target of President Trump's primary deception has always been his followers. The people who trust him the most are the ones being most deceived and undercut. That's just one of the cruel truths that will one day be manifest and will one day come to manifestation. He will pay for that because once his core supporters realize that they have been deceived all along and that they were being played fools by him, the person to whom they gave all of this support, that will be an ugly day for President Trump, because when it falls, it'll be like a cliff. They'll just fall off the edge and it'll never be recovered. We're not there yet, though. That's still on. Well, another odd one is from Marco Rubio. I'm not sure if this was last night or today either, but he was making some comments here. And listen to this at first. He's going to be talking here about something that we have to start doing.
We have to start thinking about, what do we do if a few weeks from now Iran decides we don't care, we're going to keep the straits closed, we're going to sink any ship that doesn't listen to us or doesn't pay us. Then someone's going to have to do something about it. Okay, they're not just going to voluntarily reopen the straits. I know there's a plan in place for what to do if the shooting stops, but we have to have a plan B for if someone is shooting. You know, how do you reopen the straits?
What are you talking about? What is today? This is May 23rd. This war started on the 28th of February. And today, you want to start thinking about what happens if we can't open the Strait of Hormuz? I mean, what is anybody supposed to make out of that? When you have one of the top 3 positions, in these 2 videos, you have the number 1 and at least the number 3, possibly number 2 position in the United States of America, Secretary of State, President of the United States. And he is saying, we got to figure out a plan B. How can you possibly not have a plan B, C, and D at this point? You should have had at least a plan A, B, and C before the thing started, before you launched one missile, before you sent one ship into combat, before you launched one plane. You should have said, all right, here's how we hope this goes. But if it goes sideways, then here's the 2 or 3 things we'll do after that. If it goes great, if it goes better than expected, well, here's some alternatives we can do. Here's some things we can do to rapidly accelerate so we have resources. So if it goes really good, I need to have resources in place to be able to exploit that. If it goes sideways, I need to have resources to mitigate these damages, and we have to have a plan. All of that happens before one missile is fired. Or it should, if you have just the least amount of common sense and maturity. And one has to wonder, do we have that at any level in this government? And then here in the 4th month, the 3rd or 4th month of this war, you have the Secretary of State saying, we got to figure something out. And if they keep doing what they're doing, which they've been doing since day 1, we got to have a plan B. So you're trying to figure out a plan B as you're trying to allegedly negotiate an end to this war. Now, there's been a lot of talks about some things on Saturday. I think it was Friday into Saturday. No, I'm sorry, Thursday night into Friday, and then that led into Saturday here. A lot of talk on the Western media, especially on X and several other social media platforms, that we were nearly there. We nearly had a deal. Everything was close. We're just trying to finalize things. Maybe it's going to be an end of war negotiation, and then that's going to set the stage for 30 days of debate, discussion over all the details. But it's going to be a full end of war, et cetera. There was no truth to that either. That was all a lie. That's like the 7th or 8th, maybe even the 10th time something like that has happened. I'll tell you for sure what that was, but based on evidence. That was another attempt to manipulate markets, to make on a Friday, to make the stock market go up and the price of oil go down. And both of those things happened. So somebody, according to reports that I've seen, again, made a lot of money. There was no truth to any of it. So again, somebody with direct connections to President Trump himself, because they know when he's going to make announcements, and they know when leaks are going to be given to all the usual suspects here, CBS News, Axios, several Bloomberg, a number of Fox News, of course. All of these are given all this information. They keep publishing it out, and it has the expected results on the markets. They either go up or down, depending on which one we're talking about. And somebody already knows what's coming in at place market contracts so that they benefit from whichever way the market goes ahead of time. But in fact, there was no negotiations. Look, you can't have an end-to-war negotiation by just sending notes back and forth through intermediaries. All of those things, which are going on, by the way, there are communications through intermediaries between the U.S. and Iran. But all of those things happen to set up the actual negotiations. You have to get to some level of where, all right, we're at least in the same zip code. Now then, let's meet together. You cannot get to an end of war negotiation unless you have the principles sitting right there, like the Secretary of State or vice presidential level. Somebody at that level. We haven't even done that yet. So no one should believe any of that. But that's just the world we live in right now, where people are able to make billions of dollars, individuals who have hundreds of millions to put on these contracts, and then they're reaping in the billions. People claim that, oh, we're investigating this and that, but nothing ever happens, and the trades keep going on. Because I've said this before, and this is just another example. We're basically a country that's no longer governed by the rule of law. And so whether it's international law, whether it's the Constitution or financial law like this, no one cares, because all the instruments of power are in the hands of the guy and his very closest friends who benefit from it. They're not going to investigate themselves. So that's what we have. Now, that's stuff domestically we've got to worry about. But how does that affect what's going on internationally? Let me just show you a couple of things here, just from last night and this morning here. You have a Field Marshal from Pakistan, Asmir Munir, met with Araghchi, the foreign minister from Iran, yesterday. This meeting continued until late into the night. The two sides exchanged views on the latest diplomatic efforts and initiatives to prevent the escalation of tensions and end the war imposed by the United States and Israel in Iran. And then this morning, we had another, Iran's chief negotiator, Ghalibaf, has met with the Pakistani Army Chief Munir again, according to the same meeting. So they're putting this out. So they're talking quite a bit there. After this conversation, you had Ghalibaf, and this is just, I think, let's see, when was this? This is 7:28. So that was just a little over an hour and a half ago since when we're making the show here. Ghalibaf warns Trump, we will not compromise on the rights of our nation and country, especially with a party that has no honesty at all and cannot be trusted. There's that word again. Our armed forces have rebuilt themselves during the ceasefire. If Trump foolishly restarts the war, they will definitely be more crushing and bitter for the United States than on the first day of the war. Now, there have been other reports here in the last couple of days to where the Iranian side has said, listen, we're not only going to go back to what we did before, and we've now seen validated by Western media that the missiles and drones fired by the Iranian side were in many cases pinpoint accurate. However many were actually intercepted and knocked down is a subject of debate. But what is not subject of debate is that whatever that percentage is that got through was on target and at the critical target. So we already know that they can hit stuff that they shoot at, and it can be really harsh in its results for us, costly for us. Now they're saying that if we go back to it, they're going to expand the target list, not just in the GCC, but they say expand it beyond the Middle East. And it's up to anybody's interpretation of what that means, because they weren't very specific on it. They intentionally weren't specific. So they're saying, listen, we're going to hit other countries. We're going to hit other targets in the same countries. And they've had a lot of time to come up with a new target list, and things that they didn't attack the first time, they could hit the second thing. See, our problem is that if we want to go back and restart the war, there's only one set of targets that we need to go after that we didn't get the first time. Those are buried in a mountain. So when we had the best of our long-range missiles, especially the ATACMS, the JASMs, and the Tomahawk cruise missiles, and some of these bunker busters too, they had limited effect on some of these underground missile cities. Most had no effect at all. Just hitting granite mountainsides, rattling the rafters, knocking some dust off some of the light fixtures inside, no doubt. But that's it. If we return, all we can do is fire the same munitions against the same target, and we'll have the same outcome. So we don't have anywhere to ratchet up to, unless President Trump is thinking about using nuclear weapons, and that's a whole nother conversation that we'll have. Even that, though, would not destroy Iran, because these underground bunkers are designed to survive nuclear blasts. So there's that too. But the other side, Iran does have lots of room to expand their target list and can bring profoundly more pain to us. There's also the issues of these underwater internet cables that are running under the Strait of Hormuz, which just devastate the global economy, especially in that region. It would just be absolutely devastating. And it would take years probably to recover and to repair all that stuff. They're saying all that risk too if attack. So they have a lot more military cards they could play if we go back to war. We can only play the same hand that didn't work the first time, folks. It would be absurd to the highest degree to go back and try to do what didn't work the first time. It is a hardcore issue. The mountains can't be penetrated with our weapons, and that's where they have their long-range missiles and their drone factories. Everything that they need to continue to execute on all these things that are going on here. And of course, our blockade is causing significant damage inside of Iran. It's causing significant hardship on their population. Unemployment is going through the roof. Their currency has been devalued because of our efforts like this. So they are definitely suffering, and it's not minor and it's not insignificant, but it's something that they can survive and they can endure for a long time. And they're calculating that they can endure that longer than we can. Because all of our issues, while President Trump's statements and others leaked information did drive the price of oil down, these strategic petroleum reserves and all these other storage tanks are getting close to running dry, where they don't have it. And then there will be a physical shortage of supply, and you just can't do economic activity if you don't physically have the oil. And we're getting close to that. And I think the Iranian side is calculating, hey, dude, you want to go down that path? You want to play chicken? We can play it because we can suffer more than you do. Now, there is some information out here on drop site news this morning that talks about what the Iranian side are willing to talk about, because they are willing to talk. There's a reason why all these things that they're talking about with Pakistan to try and have a negotiation, they actually have some terms. But let's take a look at what they are. This is what's being reported so far today. The Iranian side, their proposal, what they're talking to Pakistan about is two tracks. Number one, end the war first. Iran wants a formal declaration ending the war, an end to the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports, and the release of frozen Iranian assets before broader nuclear negotiations began. In exchange, Iran would provisionally reopen the Strait of Hormuz, waive transit fees temporarily, and allow maritime traffic to resume while a new governance of regime for Hormuz is actually finalized. Iran is also, this is on track one, Iran is also demanding a compensation mechanism funded by the U.S. and other countries involved in the attacks on Iran to pay damages inside Iran, along with the end to Israeli attacks in Lebanon. Almost all of that right there is all poison pills. This is what Iran actually wants, and what they said they would be willing to end the war if all these things happen. That's just track one. And there's so many things in there. I mean, first, a formal declaration ending the war, and that the U.S. would have to end its blockade and then release frozen Iranian assets. And of course, for many in the United States, and you're going to see this in a second, that one pill right there is the most poison, because that's what they dogged the Obama administration for, unfreezing Iranian assets. And they always characterized it as giving plane loads of cash to Iran. You didn't give them anything. You just released what was already theirs. But that's track one. Then you get down here to track two. It says nuclear negotiations after the war ends, or after the war ends. That's when we would start nuclear negotiations. Then they would suspend enrichment above 3.6 for 10 years. Dilute uranium enriched above 20% under supervision inside Iran. Commit not to develop a nuclear weapon, which they have. That's easy for them. It's a throwaway. That's what they've always said since 2003. Now, these are also poison pills, because this says we will retain the ability to enrich, and even that will have a 10-year sunset, which of course was one of the things that the Trump administration complained so bitterly about the Obama nuclear deal, is that it had a 10-year sunset. So that's also a poison pill. And in return, Iran wants, if that wasn't bad enough, recognition of its right to enrich, limited enrichment rights preserved under a future agreement, and full sanctions relief. Other than that, it's a great deal. So that's what the Iranian side is wishing. So when I said at the top of this show here that I think that all the conditions, when you look at what's happening, it's almost the only path left. The only path left to the Trump is there are two. There's still, even with all of that, there are two. One is the one that I will continue to advocate until bombs start dropping again. That's the walk away plan. Just walk away. Claim victory, say all this damage that Trump loves to just rattle off all these things that have happened, and things have been blown up, people killed, airplanes, ships, all that stuff. Just say, yep, and Operation Midnight Hammer, you can throw that in there as another feather in your cap. We walked away with this, we've blown it up. Take them 2 decades to reply, and if they ever do anything more, we'll come back in and bomb them again. Whatever. Say whatever you want to say. That's one possibility. The other one is the bombs away. That's it, folks. It's walk away or bombs away. There's no other option. This is why I've told you over and over again, there is no diplomatic path forward here, because you see, this is what the Iranian side is saying. I actually had a communication this morning with Professor Morandi. Let me see if he replied to my last one here. And I asked him, I said, is Iran willing to be talking back on anything? Are they willing to be flexible anywhere? And he said, really, he said, Iranians are in a stronger position now than Trump. So they're in no rush to make a deal. Trump's people are showing some flexibility, but not nearly enough so far. Iran believes that if there is war, it has the upper hand. And if a stalemate, it can wait out longer than the U.S. Iran will not relinquish any of the 10 points that it said earlier, which is the version of what we just showed you there. It could be flexible on some issues, for example, how to collect fees at the Strait of Hormuz without having to publicize, etc. So he's saying, look, this is the Iranian position. What Dropside was talking about there, that is Professor Marandi, just minutes before we came on air here. That's what he's saying. So if that's the Iran negotiating position, let me show you what the view is from the United States side on any of those poison pills I just showed you. This is Mark Dubowitz from Foundation of Defensive Democracy. He's the very hawkish and anti-Iranian organization here in the United States. He says this proposal is a bad joke. No serious American president, especially President Trump, would accept a deal that makes the JCPOA look brilliant by comparison. The regime has never been weaker, yet its arrogance is exceeded only by its grasp of reality. One may wonder who he was talking about on that last phrase, because you talk about somebody that whose arrogance is only exceeded by its lack of grasp on reality. You might need to be looking in the mirror on that one, friend. And to his other comment there about the JCPOA, this deal would, to accept this deal would make the JCPOA look brilliant by comparison. And on that narrow point, I agree with him, because the deal we had with the JCPOA was brilliant in comparison, because it capped it out at 3.67%. It capped out how much they could reprocess, what they could do with that reprocessed material. They got rid of, I think, hundreds of pounds of the stuff that they had prior to that. They had very intensive, intrusive inspections so that we could validate all these things. And when they were found to be out of compliance, we put pressure. They came back into compliance, all those things. They declared they didn't want a nuclear weapon. It was perfect. It was brilliant. It would have prevented them from ever getting a nuclear weapon. And even with the sunset clauses, just understand, if we had done on our part what we had promised, and the Iranian side had continued doing what it said, and through that full 10-year period of time, instead of Trump getting out in 2018, then by the time the 2025 end date had come up and the time to renegotiate, it would have been renegotiated. There is no way, it's almost impossible, that Iran would have said, you know what, we're just going to get out of this deal. We're going to let these sunset clauses go off, and we're going to go begin, because that would have immediately, because of the provisions of the JCPOA, would have referred snapback to sanctions, and everything would have been thrown on them. So all these sanctions that they would have gotten used to living without and doing commerce and having a good economy, those things would have been all thrown back at the windows, and they would have destroyed everything. Ergo, they wouldn't have, because they would have had significant motivation to continue to comply with it. That's what the likes of Mark Dubowitz, Lindsey Graham, Jack Keane, Keith Kellogg, Donald Trump, none of those people ever want to admit it. In fact, Donald Trump lies flat out. There's no other word to use. I'm sorry for those whose feelings that may hurt. When he says that was the JCPOA was a pathway to a bomb, that is absurd in the highest degree. It's a lie on face value. It would have prevented it. And now then, because we pulled out, and because of these two wars we've done in the span of less than a year, we are in a position now where the best that we could hope for is a negotiated settlement that would be a capitulation to Iran. And there's no other way to put that, too. We have to be honest. There's just no way to put it. That's what a negotiated end would look like. It would be a surrender to Iran, and that's what those terms are for. And that's why I say there's no way Trump will do that. You can't put a good face on that one. Just walking away and not agreeing to any of their terms is the only other alternative. So if he's not going to be a negotiated settlement, if he's not going to do the walkaway theory, just claim success, then the only thing left is to restart combat operations. And I hope he doesn't. It's just hard for me to imagine that he would. Now, from this week also, some of the best of what we learned this week, we had Colonel Doug McGregor on, who talked exactly about that issue, about how this could be resolved, and who are we even talking to?
He's trapped himself, frankly, in a very difficult position that he can attribute to his own big mouth. He's the one that said they've got to give up their enriched uranium, can't have that. They've got to open the Strait of Hormuz. Well, the Iranians have been pretty clear on that point, that they're not going to open the strait because he wants them to, and they're not going to give up their sovereignty and independence by turning over enriched uranium to the United States or anybody else.
So I have great difficulty taking the whole idea seriously that we're talking to them at all. I just don't buy it. We have an 8-letter word for it in Philadelphia, but I don't want to repeat it on the air.
He never told me what that word was. So some of you from Philadelphia or have friends from Philadelphia, you may know that. Put it in the comments. Maybe you can educate us all. But he's right there. Who are we even talking to? Because we're talking to Pakistan, it appears. So there is some negotiations going on through intermediaries and maybe through Qatar and some others that I've heard potentially, possibly even Oman. I'm not sure about if that's true or not. Those are some of the reports there, but we're definitely talking to somebody. But how can you be talking about any serious effort, a serious effort to end a war when you aren't even talking to the other side? There's not even any summits on the table. There's not even any talk about it. It is self-evident that you cannot have a negotiated end unless you're negotiating with your opponent. Just sending letters and stuff back and forth to somebody and saying you're almost there, you almost have a deal is nonsense. It's just a lie for manipulating markets, but it definitely isn't going to succeed in bringing a war to an end, especially when you see what the Iranian side is. And they're aggressively talking to the Pakistanis. They would love to have that intermediary to come through and make a deal, but you see that the terms that they're on, that they're requiring, are really, really harsh. They are not backing down anywhere. And again, this is in the context that they are suffering seriously. Their people are suffering seriously. I've been reading a lot of their official news agency, ISNA, I think it's called, and they put out a lot of stuff in the Persian language to their population. It says, look, man, we got to pull together. We have to conserve everything. We've lost so much, all this. So they're really reaching out to them. There's other reports, not from their news agency, but from other regional agencies. It says a lot of their officials are cracking down hard on them, being very cruel to some of their people and pushing them hard and saying, hey, we've got to have these austerity measures because we're going to have to own this out. People are getting upset about it naturally. It's understandable. So it's not a benign issue for the Iranian side. But as Professor Marandi told me this morning, they calculate that they can suffer that longer than we can suffer that. Because President Trump can't just keep kicking this down the road because the SPRs are running out. And we're already, even with the SPRs, there's still a dearth of physical supply in the system. And you cannot have economic activity without the requisite amount of energy, oil, gas, derivatives. And then, of course, there's the food problem we haven't talked about in a little while. That is exacerbating too. These problems compound every single day. These things are going forward. Forget about the midterms. That's now the least of President Trump's concerns. We're going to worry about whether the economy is going to start to really wobble here and maybe even go more into a recession, into a depression, because that's on the table. If we don't get this resolved, it may already be too late. We don't know. No one knows until the matters manifest and play out. But the fundamentals that are at play imply that we are in grave peril. Every day you delay makes it worse. The worst thing is if you go back to military affairs, you go back to the conflict, that's where you're going to be in real trouble. Well, that's not the only thing we have to worry about. I wish it was. That's big enough. But one other thing we learned about this week is that other war that's been raging for nearly 4.5 years now in Russia and Ukraine also is at risk of expansion, as Alistair Crook explained here.
The reliance on the sort of Article 5 that NATO would never be attacked by Russia because Russia would never dare to do such a thing. Relying on that to get around Russia's air defenses and to spring up right on target at St. Petersburg or Moscow. And it's now going stage by stage, and now it is getting too much. And at the same time, we've heard constantly from Europe this refrain, war, 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 prepare for war with Russia, prepare for war. The German leadership say, we may have war even by 2027. We may have war at any moment with Russia, even though, you look around and you can see quite clearly, Europe hasn't got the capacity for war with Russia. It hasn't got the money to finance a war with Russia. It hasn't got the troops for a war with Russia. So why are they saying it? They're saying it because they hope to provoke through Ukraine and through, if you like, using these Baltic states. They are hoping to provoke Russia towards action against NATO states.
Now, when we had that show on the air, one of the things I asked him about that last part there, which was alarming, because I'm like, wait, you just painted this long picture that the Europe doesn't have the manpower, they don't have the money, they don't have the industrial capacity, they don't have the weapon stocks, they don't have the ammunition stocks, they don't have anything that's necessary to engage in a war of any nature with Russia, and yet you heard him say, but they're trying to spawn that into, they're trying to provoke Russia into doing something so that they can get a conflict. And I said, well, how can that be? That's illogical, it's irrational, and one may argue immoral. And he said, well, because they want to draw the U.S. back in, because the U.S. is, President Trump is saying, hey, we're gonna take some troops out of Germany. We might take all of them out of Germany. We might abandon NATO. I don't know what we're going to do. We may put some troops into Poland, or we may pull some out. He's very vague on that. He keeps calling NATO a paper tiger. I want y'all to spend more money. I'm going to spend less. You know, all this stuff, distancing himself from NATO, and that's alarming many in Europe, especially the elite. And so they're saying, hey, maybe we do something like this, so we can start a conflict with Russia. Then that would require America to come in, because there's no shortage of hawkish people in the United States that are lusting for that and are angry at President Trump for even talking about pulling anything out of NATO. They said, no, we need to keep this going. Those Russians are really, really good at being a boogaboo and a bear, and a big bear that's a dangerous, scary thing to keep the money flowing, especially in the military affairs, and to keep these budgets going up to 1.5 trillion and north. Because if he gets that one, military budgets never come down, because the people in power just say, all right, that's probably enough. No, it only goes up unless somebody comes in and says, all right, we're going to have a reset or something like that. And that is a radical change. Nothing like that is even on the horizon. So if they want to keep that stuff going, they've got to have a good enemy. What they can't have is, all right, peace breaks out in the Middle East, peace breaks out in Europe. We don't need a $1.5 trillion defense budget. We don't need all that much money. So let's have a reset. So they can't have that. So they need to keep the wars going. That's what you need to understand here. That's what, and please, by all means, go back and watch that full show. It's absolutely fascinating. I think we have a version of it posted on our video tab as well. Definitely worth going back and watching. But that's kind of where we are. And that is why this whole situation is so dangerous. One other thing I want to highlight that we didn't get to this week, but is also important, and it goes back again, this theme running throughout this whole episode, of trust. And can you believe people? Now, it's one thing if it's politicians. Politicians, almost by their nature, are lying and just stretching the truth, or being deceptive, or not being all the way honest and partially true, et cetera. That's kind of a normal thing that has been inherent in politicians forever, I mean, for human history. But at least in America, we're supposed to have said, but the military tells the truth. We can count on them because their integrity is unmatched. It's what it used to be. I'm going to show you two separate things here. These are a little bit longer clips than we normally have, but you're going to see why we have so. From Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of Central Command, who came to Congress this week to testify about the conduct of the war in Iran, and answer a bunch of questions there. Well, there was a couple of key things that some members of Congress asked and said, hey, first of all, we're going to look, what about those Iranian kids that got killed on day one of the war? Have we taken at least responsibility for what we did and apologized?
Thank you. Admiral Cooper, you mentioned in your opening remarks the commitment of your command to preventing civilian harm. So just two questions about that. One, it's been 80 days, thereabouts, since the initial bombing campaign that struck the girls' school in Iran. Tehran killed, I think, over 150 schoolgirls. It's really pretty clear what happened there. But 80 days on, we have not taken responsibility for that attack. The endless stalling that's being investigated, it's being investigated, it's being investigated. In the past, when we've had these types of mistakes, they have been quickly acknowledged, even if a further investigation is necessary to figure out prevention methods. So can you at this moment acknowledge that that mistake was made and that we were responsible for it? It's something we didn't want to do and don't want to repeat.
Congressman, to reiterate, the United States does not deliberately target
Got that part.
Period. Full stop. And nor are the Iranian people our enemy. The IRGC is the adversary in this case.
I heard that in your opening statement, Admiral. I asked you a very specific question, and I'm curious what the answer is.
So the investigation is ongoing. As soon as it is complete, I'm happy to be as
that's
transparent as
enough.
possible.
We will not take responsibility for something we very obviously did.
So it's a complex investigation. The school itself is located on an active IRGC cruise missile base.
Absolutely.
It's more complex than the average strike. As soon as we're complete, I'm fully committed to transparency, given your important oversight role and the other members here.
Just so you know, and I have an enormous amount of respect for you and an enormous amount of respect for the Pentagon. I do not trust that answer. What we've seen out of the Secretary of Defense and his callous disregard for any sort of rules of engagement or protecting civilian life may make us suspicious.
And man, the bar was so low that member of Congress made it so easy for him to just say, yes, our evidence, our initial investigation makes it clear that we misidentified that building and that we hit it, and it was a terrible loss of life. Our hearts go out to the parents of these children, to the spouses and the other family members of the teachers that were killed. It was a terrible tragedy. And then if you want, you can throw in, how dare those darn Iranians put school kids in the middle of a military target, something like that, if you wanted to. But he said, look, all he was asking for, the bar was so low. Acknowledge that mistakes were made and give us assurances that it won't happen again. He can't even do that. He again starts saying all this stuff about we never target civilians. Didn't ask you that. That's not anything that we do. That's not what we're all about. I got it. That's not what I'm asking about. Rules of engagement, whatever. I want to know, are we at least willing to acknowledge responsibility? And he would not do it. Now, if somebody had been at war with us, if Iran had been at war with us, and let's say on one of these military bases that they have hit of ours, if instead of hitting a $1 billion radar, for example, that they misidentified something and instead hit a dependent school and killed a bunch of American kids, are we going to accept, hey, it's war. Sometimes mistakes happen. It's bad, but it is war. We did have them on a military base. We do that, by the way. We had, I don't know if in these particular ones, but I know in many of my bases that I was deployed in overseas, there were schools. So we had places for kids, daycares even, and they were on a base. So it's always been conceivable that someone can either do it on purpose or misidentify a building or something and hit it. Are we ever, and I mean ever, under any circumstances, you name it, are we going to say, well, it's regrettable that our children were killed by the enemy, but it is war after all. But as soon as they do a thorough investigation and very far into the future, when they explain to us what happened, then we'll say, well, it's regrettable. I mean, we would not wait 1 hour, friend, not 1 hour. We would be immediately launching something back at somebody, and we would be building this whole publicity campaign about demonizing the other side and saying how evil, how wicked they are, and they all deserve to be destroyed. There is no justification. There is no explanation they could give. That's what we would say. And now that we have done it, we can't even cross a bar that's based on the ground by saying, yes, it was a terrible mistake. We have never issued any kind of condolences to the family, nothing like that. I saw that in Afghanistan when there was a number of times when there was some legitimate mistakes that were made and we did kill civilians. And we took responsibility for it then. We made public announcements for it in some cases. We sent admirals to villages where people were killed that were not supposed to be, that we thought were Taliban that weren't. We did that back then. But under the current leadership, we admit nothing and do everything. Now, if that had been the only soundbite I showed you from that exchange, that would have been bad enough. Unfortunately, it got a little bit worse.
Do you think it's ever appropriate for anybody in a leadership position to use the words "no quarter" when describing how we are conducting our operations in Iran?
So I think it's appropriate as military leaders, we follow the law of armed conflict and our constitutional responsibilities, and that's what we've done.
And you would agree that no quarter is not following the law?
I would agree it's our constitutional responsibility to follow the law.
Is no quarter following the law or not?
I would agree that we follow the law, sir.
But you're not going to get specific
the monikers and how other people
have sort of a general, generic understanding of it, and then do whatever we want to do with no accountability. Look, people make mistakes. It's in a war. Things happen. I get that. Okay. And I'm not going to be as overly judgmental as some, but that the arrogance of this Pentagon and their unwillingness to acknowledge any mistake is precisely the reason that we are in the hole that we're in with no way out of. Somebody in that command needs to own up to the dumb things that are said and done to give us some confidence that they won't keep happening.
Again, the bar was so low. Just tell me no quarter is against American law, against American military law, against international law, warfare. Just acknowledge that it is and that we're not going to do it. That's all he had to say. But instead, he just kept going, we will follow the law. Okay. And will you follow the law on this? We will follow the law. Okay. Is this saying no quarter following the law? All you got to say is no. But see, he can't. And let me tell you why he can't. Because he's a coward. No other way to put it. There's a lot worse ways I could put it, but there's no way more accurate. He is afraid of Pete Hegseth and is afraid of President Trump. And he knows, Admiral Cooper knows that if he said yes to that question and answered it honestly with integrity and said, yes, a charge of no quarter violates American law and we're not going to follow it. He knows that the second he gets up out of that chair, his phone's going to be ringing. It's going to be Pete Hegseth on the line, ripping him a new one. As soon as he gets back to the Pentagon, he'll have a face-to-face. He could be fired that later afternoon. He knows all that. And he is not willing to do the right thing on something so easy and such a low bar is to just acknowledge what American law is and that he's committed to honor it and that he's not going to violate it. Instead, he lies a second time by saying we will follow the laws of war when he won't. He won't even call out what the law is. And he will not give them assurances that we're not going to do that. And of course, Secretary Hegseth won't either. We've shown you that soundbite on our show in the past where he said that. No mercy, no quarter. He even says it in prayers sometimes. It's as bizarre and perverted as it gets. That's who is leading our country right now. And of course, that's protected by President Trump. So that is the state of play right now. There is no morality among our senior leaders. There's no integrity and there's no honor and there's no honesty even with the American people, with anybody else. Only in the future, after all this is over and people are going to go back and be able to do, interviews with hundreds of people that were involved with all this. Only then will we know the full scope of what's going on. I don't know. I have a few sources that have access to the White House and the government at various places, but they're not that big. Just being honest, they're not that many anyway. So there's a lot that I don't know about what's going on. But what we do know, with no sources needed, is that what we see in public is that there is a gross shift in what used to be the character and honor and morality of the United States, at least an aspiration. I'm not naive to think that that was ever actually the case all across the board, but many of us, and I was in there, so I know that there were many in uniform that genuinely aspired and tried and sought and acted to embody those things and make them real. Integrity, being honest, open to power, challenging power, but being honest about what we're doing and seeking to do the right thing, limiting our power. I saw it in combat, so I know for a fact that it was at least a portion of the fabric of our country. It has been. And I know that it still is because we have some contacts and some of my friends have contacts with our troops now, and there are still, I would say, a significant majority of them are still that way and are in anguish about what they see among our senior leaders here. But there are too many others in our public writ large that are cheering this stuff on, and they're fine with no quarter given. I've shown you that the compilation before, and after we illegally overtook the leader of Venezuela and stole their oil, and they're bragging about it. There's no law, international law. There's just the law of the jungle, and we're the lion, and they all bragged about it. Those are politicians. Those are supporters. So that's a problem that's going to be harder to overcome. But we have to be open about what the nature of the problem is right now. Let me just tell you one thing as we close here today. This is not just an academic process here. This is not just well, we shouldn't be that way. We should be this way. There are consequences to being this way. When no one trusts you, no one will listen to you. Everyone on the other side will do whatever they can to harm you that otherwise wouldn't, because of fear that you have no morals, no foundation, you have no values except for power. And you will exploit everyone if you get the chance, which means now then they will start to do the same to undercut that, to limit the power to even self-defense. That's where we are. And especially at this moment here, I fear, we're making this on Saturday morning, I fear that by the time I get back to my studio and back to my home base on Sunday night, I wonder will we be back at hot war again. A lot of signs indicate that. A lot of evidence suggests that we will. And as I pointed out at the opening of the show, there's only really three paths that are theoretically possible: negotiated settlement, the walk away, or the bombs away. Forget diplomacy, because we're not having any. We're not actually engaging any. So it's either walk away or bombs away. And walk away seems to be the least likely now. Guess what that leaves? That's what I fear. I don't know how Trump gets out of this without doing the bombs away. I look forward to seeing you Monday morning back from my studio in Washington.
Hi, everybody. Today's Saturday, May 23rd, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother, Professor Miranda is here with us. Welcome back.
Hi, Nima. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure being on your show.
So just let us know what's going on in Tehran. Last night, everybody was talking about two delegations. One, the Pakistani official, which is the head of the army in Pakistan, Asim Munir, Pakistani army chief. He was in Tehran negotiating, talking with Iranian officials. And then we've learned the Qatari delegation went to Iran as well, and they're doing their job. I don't know, they're representing GCC countries or they have a different sort of message for Iranian officials. What was happening last night?
Well, the U.S. or the Trumpian talks, the U.S.-Iranian talks, or we shouldn't call them talks, the negotiations, the messages being sent back and forth, because there's no direct communication between the two sides. But the message that are passing back and forth are happening more swiftly. And I think the reason why the Pakistanis are in Iran is to make the process move forward more rapidly. The Iranians do not want direct negotiations. They don't want indirect negotiations. They prefer messages to go back and forth and to be written, to make sure that there's no ambiguity, because the Americans have lied to Iran a lot in the past through verbal statements. And also the mediators, when something is verbal, then it's not clear if the messages go through exactly as they should. So the Iranians want them all to be written. And so I think the texts are going back and forth at a more rapid, I can't say much more rapid pace, I don't know, but I would imagine at a more rapid pace than before. The Qataris, they're not mediators, so I don't know the details of the trip, but they came and went, and they probably had something to do with the negotiations. But in any case, at the end of the day, this is between Iran and the United States, and the only thing that is important is what's in the two and the messages being sent by the Iranians and the messages being sent by the Americans. My understanding is that there is some flexibility on the Americans. But the question is how much and how far is the United States prepared to go? And so far there's no breakthrough. And at least until I last heard, there's no breakthrough. I don't think there's any breakthrough as we speak either. And it could go either way. The Iranian armed forces are on full alert. They thought there was I mean, for the last 3 weeks, they've been expecting possible U.S. strikes, but last night they were taking it seriously. I personally didn't think it would happen last night because of the ongoing talks. It would not look good at all when the Pakistani army chief is in Tehran and the United States assaults the country. It doesn't make sense. Although Trump is not a rational or reasonable person, so it could happen anyhow. But in any case, we'll have to see where that goes. I think I don't think that it's. I think there is a possibility that there could be a deal, but I think the possibility for another attack on Iran is quite high as well. It could go either way. The Iranians are not going to be very flexible, and it's obvious why. They won the war, and they didn't start the war. And in the U.S. siege warfare, the United States is hurting more than the world economy and the United States are hurting more than Iran. I mean, in the long run, they're hurting more. I mean, the global crisis is about to hit very hard. They don't have much time. The Iranians can wait longer. The Iranians are more patient for a host of reasons. One is that they're victims. Iranians, being Shia Muslims in particular, that sense of resilience and resistance is very strong in them. Resistance against the oppressor, and that is something very deep in Iranian culture. And of course, we didn't start the war. That strengthens that sense of resilience. And the Americans made a mistake at the beginning of the war. They didn't impose the siege on Iranian ports from day one. Iran did its trade for the duration of the war and a week or so, or 10 days afterwards, using the Strait of Hormuz without any difficulty. And the Americans even removed the sanctions on Iranian oil for a period of time where Iran had a lot of oil on the high seas. The Iranians were actually expecting the Americans to impose a siege from the very beginning. And they were very pleasantly surprised to see that they didn't. So right now, I mean, let's look at Western assessments. I think about a month ago, the Americans were saying that the Iranians can tolerate this for like 4 months. I don't know if I think it's correct. The U.S. intelligence has told the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal that Iranian missile and drone and military capabilities are much better and much greater than was initially perceived. Well, we've been saying that all along. But if we say it's propaganda, if they admit it with after weeks of delay, it's news. But even that is an understatement. The Iranians are more prepared today than they were before the war, militarily. The economy is definitely doing worse, and life is more difficult, inflation is higher. But militarily speaking, the Iranians are more prepared for war than they were 3 months ago. So let's say that the U.S. intelligence services, their 4 months estimate of Iran is correct. Let's say 1 month has passed, 3 months.
Welcome to Wix Harmony. Take the speed of AI and pixel level control to go from words into
From what we're hearing from economists and energy market experts, the real crisis, when things begin to become really bad in the global economy is weeks away, not 3 months away. So if it's going to be a waiting game, the Iranians can outwait the United States. If the Americans had started the siege from day one, let's say if we agree with the 4 months, I don't think it's 4 months. I think Iran can wait much longer, but let's say it's 4 months. Then that would make it like a month and a half. That would make them closer to each other, right? So if we cut, let's say, the 3 months that are left, if we remove a month and a half from that, if the Americans had started from day one, then let's say the Iranians could wait a month and a half. The Americans can wait maybe, I don't know, 3-4 weeks. I don't know, but it would have made a difference. I believe Iran still would have had the upper hand, and but it would have strengthened the U.S. position. I think the reason why they didn't do it from day one was because they thought that they would win the war easily, and they didn't want the global markets to become unstable and would just be a glitch. And then after a few weeks, things would go back to normal. So they didn't look at it from that. But I think it was a major tactical mistake, which is not reversible. It's too late. But again, I stress that even if they had done an ICE, Iran would still have the upper hand, in my opinion. So right now, the Iranians are more patient than the Americans. The Iranian society is more resilient. They're willing to tolerate much more than the Americans. The military is prepared for war. It's more prepared now than before. In siege warfare, the Iranians have the upper hand, as I've been explaining. And the Americans are in a rush. They want a deal now. And it's obvious why they're in a rush. It's because of the global economic crisis. The Iranians are not in a rush. That I know. I can say that with 100% confidence that they're not in a rush. So that gives Iran even extra advantage. So that's where we are. I don't know if there's going to be a deal, though, because the Americans are going to. I don't think there's going to be a comprehensive deal. If there is one, it's going to probably be something like the ceasefire that we had, but perhaps larger in scope. But I don't think we're going to have a comprehensive.
Yesterday, we've heard that maybe the United States is giving the green light to Israel attacking Iran without the active participation of the United States. Then the Iranian response cannot be attacking on, the attacks on GCC countries, because Israel is attacking Iran. There is no, reason for Iran to attack GCC countries. What is this logic? What is your understanding of that?
It's not going to work. It's not. I saw that too. And first of all, the Israelis don't have those capabilities. And even in the last war, the 12-day war, the Israelis their jets were being refueled by the Americans. And the equation has changed. Iran is, it's not going to be like it was before. Iran is going to assert its power, and it's going to punish Israel, the Israeli regime, and its allies. There's no doubt about it. The Emirates, I think, would it would be a bad day for them if the Israelis attacked Iran. That's for sure. I think that Iran would just. If that happens, I think I would definitely not like to be in them. If war starts, I wouldn't like to be anywhere in any of these countries, but especially the Emirates. These are just wishful. This is wishful thinking on behalf of the Americans. The Iranians are going to. This will be the big war. This will be bigger than the previous war. and it's going to end one way or another. So I don't know if there's going to be an agreement. I don't know if we're going towards war, but the Americans are not going to be able to play these games with Iran anymore. That era is finished.
And what do we know about the range of Iranian missiles? Because they said IRGC has announced that if the war starts, it's not gonna be a regional war. It's gonna go beyond the region. And yesterday I was talking with my, the experts and the friends we have on this podcast. There were some sort of doubts. What is the range of Iranian missiles, and how are they going to be able to increase that range? And because we know, by the way, that the former supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, because of his policy, his strategy, he said we have to be limited to, for example, a particular range for the missiles. But right now, what do we know about that? Is that going to change because of this war of aggression against Iran? And they know that they're using the American bases in Romania, Germany, Greece, and other countries. They're using these bases against Iran.
Yeah, I think that when they say that Iran is going to respond beyond, its response is going to go beyond the region, I think that is definitely it's going to happen. And I don't know whether like Iran will strike Diego Garcia or something like that. I mean, in these far off places, the Americans are much more vulnerable because their assets are not well protected. They're out there in the open. So Iran, if a few missiles hit somewhere far off, then they could do a lot of damage to the United States. But also, Iran's allies in the region are now much more prepared. Yemen is very prepared for war, and the Iraqi resistance is prepared to escalate far beyond what it did last time round. And as I said, the Iranian military capabilities are much stronger than they were 3 months ago. So it'll be devastating, and it will not go well for the United States or the Israeli regime or their regional proxies. And there's no way that the Americans are going to be able to carry out some type of limited war and get away with it, or have the Iranians respond in a way which would please the United States. The Iranians will strike back in a way in which it suits their interests. This is a broad anti-Iranian coalition. It's a broad coalition against the axis of resistance. It's a broad coalition against the free people of the region, the Iranians, Yemen, Iraq, the Iraqi resistance, Hezbollah, the Palestinians, and Iran will deal with it both regionally and beyond. Also, there are other things that can be contemplated about global energy markets. I mean, with the technologies that exist today, the production of oil could easily be stopped outside of this region. I mean, the Republic of Azerbaijan is one place, but that's closer to home. But you can envisage places which are under U.S. occupation or taken hostage by the United States, or Libya, uh, or other places where the United States, the West, they have major interests which could be targeted. I have no idea what this could mean, but in today's world, when the Israeli regime carries out assassinations from thousands of kilometers away, or they bomb targets by flying over multiple countries, I think that it's when the Americans and the Israelis have created uh, a jungle and are imposing the law of the jungle, then they shouldn't expect others not to respond in kind.
When you talk about we may reach some sort of agreement, is this agreement some sort of document about the preconditions for the next round of negotiations? What is that? Because many people are arguing there is no negotiations going on. There is no active talks between the two parties. We have Pakistan, sending messages, giving the American message to Iranian and taking the Iranian message and deliver it to the American. What is that? And what do we know about? Let's assume they reach some sort of positive outcome. What is that positive outcome?
Well, yes, you're right. There are no negotiations. There's no direct communications. They're just letters. The Pakistanis are not doing much more than sending the letters back and forth. What I'm hearing is that the Americans are showing some flexibility, but not nearly enough. So there's no reason to believe that there will be a big breakthrough at all. And it could be that tomorrow morning at this time we may be at war. Maybe tonight we may be at war. Maybe the day after. After all, this is a 3-day weekend, and they like starting wars during weekends. A 3-day weekend in the United States because Memorial Day is on Monday. So this may be the time that and we know that the United States loves carrying out wars while they're negotiating, in the hope of like on both occasions when they launched the 12-day war, they were negotiating with Iran, and the negotiations were it turned out, were just a ploy. They just wanted to make the Iranians think that there won't be war. Then before this war, we were negotiating and there was progress, and the foreign minister of Oman went to the United States saying that there was significant progress, and then they launched the war. And then after the war, we had the ceasefire, and the Americans, instead of abiding by the ceasefire, they impose a blockade on Iranian ports, and the Israelis, of course, are carrying out genocidal attacks against Lebanese civilians as we speak. So negotiations with the United States don't necessarily mean anything. And messages being sent back and forth through the Pakistanis don't necessarily mean anything either. As I said, we could wake up tomorrow morning and war will have started, despite the fact that we're hearing that the Americans are showing some flexibility. Maybe they're showing flexibility so to fool Iran into thinking that war is off the table. But that's not going to work. The Iranians are 100% prepared for war. And their working assumption is that there will be war. That is the working assumption. The assumption is that there will be war. It's a given. Now, if the negotiations get anywhere, fine. But they're planning for war. But if there is going to be an agreement, the Iranians are not going to be very flexible. Why? Because they won the war. They're the victim. They have the upper hand. And in the siege warfare, the Americans have used a double-edged sword. Yes, they besieged Iran, but they besieged the global economy now for almost 3 months too. And the global economy, from what we are hearing, is weeks away from the crisis exploding. And some say it could be at the beginning of June, some say the middle of June. Of course, it's a process. It's not like one day everything becomes clear, but things are going to deteriorate rapidly from what we're hearing from people in the know. And that is the reason why the Americans have such a sense of urgency. As I said earlier, the Americans want an agreement now. The Iranians are, today. The Iranians are saying, no, we have to do this properly. The Iranians are in no rush. So obviously the Americans have reasons why they're in such a rush. I don't think that I don't think there will be a comprehensive agreement, but there could be a partial agreement. And there are ways in which Iran can be flexible. I mean, without compromising its principles. I mean, Iran is not going to give up nuclear enrichment. It's not going to accept this long period of time where they don't enrich uranium or anything like that. But it's not going to give up control of the Strait of Hormuz. It's not going to give up its sovereignty. It's not going to give up its demands for reparations and the removal of sanctions. But there's some ways in which I could conceive it being flexible. I mean, for example, Iran is going to get take fees or get fees for the Strait of Hormuz. Does it have to announce it and make a big deal out of it? No, not necessarily. There are ways of doing these things while you can make it lessen sensitivity. There are ways that some things can be done. But again, at the end of the day, it's going to be the Americans who are going to have to give the concessions, not the Iranians. The Iranians can give token concessions. They can make some tactical changes to give Trump an off ramp, but they're not going to change. Why? They won the war. They have the upper hand on siege warfare, and the Iranians have the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans want it open. The Iranians are saying it was open. You close it, and if it's going to be normal, then things have to be normal for us too. And so the Iranians they're the ones with the power, and Iranian people are patient. A lot of people have great expectations in Iran. The government has to take that into account. Some expectations are unrealistic, in my opinion. Some people, they're demanding unconditional surrender or something like that from the Americans. But it's important that the government has to show that they were able to. I don't like using the term cash in, but they were able to use this opportunity to change the equation, and I'm confident that they will be able to do that. But again, we make up. If I was a betting man, and thank God I'm not, I would not bet on a deal.
Yeah. Yesterday, all GCC countries together condemn Iranian new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. And is that a political posture? And behind the scene, there's somehow they have no choice but agreeing with Iran's new sort of strategy for the Strait of Hormuz, new mechanism, by the way, new system, the toll system that they have in place. And the other point is, Professor Mandy, last night we know that the Qatari delegation was in Tehran. What was the main reason for that? Is that a communication between Iran and GCC countries?
Well, I don't know the details of that, and so I shouldn't speculate. Uh, from what I've read, not told. I haven't been told. From what I've read, it has to do with the negotiations. So, but whether I haven't read that they're representing a broader. I mean, the 5 countries that helped the Americans attack Iran, there are major differences between them right now. And well, they can condemn all they like. They thought that they could get away with murder. They were with the Americans. They facilitated the war. They funded the war. They killed our people. And pretending that they were neutral is just an insult to our intelligence. No one believes it. That's why across the region, people were cheering Iran when Iran was striking these regimes in retaliation, because they know. Everyone knows. And the only people who weren't cheering were the Wahhabis and the Salafis and the Takfiris, who are all on the payroll, and others who are on the payroll. Otherwise, everyone, people were cheering. Why? Because they know that these regimes, where they stand and who they are. And, they're each is worse, as they say in Persian, each is worse than the next, as the yiki az yiki badtar. One is worse than the other, or whatever, however that would be translated. So there's they can complain all they want, but the status of the Strait of Hormuz is never going to go back to where it was before, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Absolutely nothing. They should have refrained from killing Iranians. They thought, and remember, before we were hearing that they were against the war before the war started, but then it turned out that they were not actually against the war. Now some of them are, because they paid a heavy price, and they know that if the war restarts, that could be the end of their regimes. I mean, if Iran destroys Qatar's gas facilities and wrecks them completely, then Qatar is nothing. If Iran destroys the critical infrastructure of any of these countries, it could do it swiftly, and it would bring an end to these countries. So now they think differently, except for the Emirates, whose leader is firmly in the Netanyahu camp, which is actually a good thing for Iran, because the more they're associated with Israel, the more popular Iran becomes. The more people see that the Iranians as despite all the propaganda, as the Iranians as the protagonists, and these regimes as the antagonists. These are not smart moves to show, to expose, to make open their relationship with the Israeli regime. These are stupid moves. But their complaints are not really important. The only thing that is important is Iran and the United States. No one else has a role to play. The Israeli regime, of course, because of its influence on the United States, because of Zionism, that is, when I say the United States, I'm including the Israeli regime. But Israel is in its own has facing a lot of crises at home, and the problems that the regime, the internal crises, Netanyahu's problems, these are growing. It's becoming clear that the situation in Israel is not nearly as good as they've been presenting it to be. And of course, in Lebanon, they're being hit hard by Hezbollah. Extraordinary scenes coming from, and then of course in their rage, they go and bomb medics and they slaughter families. I mean, these Zionist monsters they're exposing themselves to the world every day, even though Western media doesn't show any of this and they hide it because their journalists are all complicit. But people are seeing what's going on. But it shows the regime. It's making it more despised, hated, of course, and it's showing the resistance being effective. So Israel has many problems, but at the end of the day, at the negotiating table, this is between Iran and the United States. And if the Israelis don't abide by the agreements between Iran and the United States, Iran will not fulfill its obligations. It won't happen. And you see, the difference between Iran today and before is that Iran is much more assertive and more confident, the public. Ayatollah Khamenei was always very confident. But you have different people. It's sort of like like it's very cold and someone wants to go into a pool or into water, and they keep putting their toe in and they keep pulling back, but once you jump into the pool, then you're in. The Iranians have always been under the threat of war. Now we're in war, and Iranians see, wow, we've done much better than many Iranians. We're doing much better than we expected. Many, of course, were expecting victory. I always expected us to have for the resistance to win, just as I always expected Hezbollah to do well on the battlefield. And before, when they were saying Hezbollah severely weakened, I always rejected that. And here we're seeing that we were right. So the Iranians are in the past, for example, with when we had the JCPOA negotiations in 2015, the nuclear deal, the deal had significant flaws. The Iranians carried out their obligations very swiftly. The Americans didn't. Obama cheated Iran, and the Americans dragged their feet. And until the very end, when Trump left, Iran was not really benefiting from the JCPOA nearly as much as it was supposed to. The Central Bank of Iran could never join the international banking system. The Americans cheated Iran. So now we saw in the ceasefire that when the Israelis said, when Netanyahu, in order to wreck the ceasefire, he carpet bombed Lebanon and slaughtered all these hundreds of innocent people just to wreck the ceasefire. And then Trump was saying, well, that Lebanon is not a part of the ceasefire. Iran said, no way. This is a part of the ceasefire. This is what we agreed upon, and you're not getting away with this. We're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz to the ships from those countries. This is the difference. In 2015, when they would not abide by their side of the bargain, the Iranians would show patience. This time they're saying, we're not having any of that. You don't abide by your commitments, we don't abide by our commitments. If Netanyahu had not carpet bombed Beirut, this and then later if Trump hadn't imposed the siege on Iranian ports, which was an act of war and a violation of the ceasefire agreement, the Strait of Hormuz would have been open today. The global economic crisis as is emerging would not exist. It would have been much smaller and easier to. It would have had the war would have had a huge impact. I mean, 45 days of shutting the Strait of Hormuz being under those circumstances was going to have a big impact, but not nearly as bad as it is now. So Netanyahu and Trump, by violating the ceasefire, they've kept the Strait of Hormuz shut. This time round, therefore, the Iranians have shown that they will not tolerate the Americans cheating Iran at the negotiating table or cheating Iran in implementing any deal. So this is going to make negotiations tougher for the Americans right now, because the Iranians are going to say, well, if you don't do this, we're not going to do that. If you lie to us, if you cheat us, then we're going to make life difficult for you. We're going to make it hell for you. And Iran has the means because they have a powerful military and because they control the Strait of Hormuz.
We know that one of the main points in this negotiation is reparation of war, with the devastation that has happened since the war started, this war of aggression on Iran. And how does Iran see GCC countries and their participation in this war? How are they going to be charged because of the devastation, because of the destruction of the Iranian facilities, Iranian life, everything that the United States and Israel did to Iran? It's part of their responsibility as well. How is that going to be communicated between Iran and GCC countries?
Well, Iran will demand reparations in one way or another. Iran is going to get its reparations. It doesn't matter who pays, and the reparations will include Lebanon. Lebanon will have to be rebuilt, and the Israeli regime will have to leave. Without that happening, there's no deal. Without removing the siege on the Strait of Hormuz, without U.S. withdrawing forces, without the Israeli regime ending the genocide in Gaza and withdrawing from Lebanon, there won't be a peace. And so reparations is a part of that. Iran's sovereignty is a part of that. Peace across the region is all of these, will be a part of the negotiations. But Iran is not going to forgive and forget. That's not happening.
I think the case of the Strait of Hormuz and what has happened in the Persian Gulf, it brings how Iran is going to communicate with other nations, with the import and export. For example, when it comes to the Caspian Sea, what would change in the near future in the eyes of Iranians? And how is that going to change the trades between Iran and Russia, China, the new lines of communication, the railroad, maybe the ports in the northern part of Iran? Is there any sort of plan on the part of the Iranian government to transform the way that they do the trade with other nations?
Oh, I think there's going to be a sea change. I think the north-south corridor between Iran and Russia is going to be a top priority. The Belt and Road Initiative, the network that links Iran to Central Asia and to China, or through Pakistan and hypothetically Afghanistan, these are going to be not just top priorities for Iran, but for everyone, because the United States is the Trump regime they're pirates, and the Chinese know that, the Iranians know that, everyone knows that. So Asian countries are going to definitely have an incentive to strengthen land routes and to strengthen trade by land in order to protect themselves from the United States. Of course, the United States will try to counter that by strengthening ISIS and Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups in Central Asia and elsewhere. That's been the plan for a long time. That's why they moved ISIS from Syria, elements of them to Afghanistan. But still, I think that as U.S. Has shown itself to be a threat to sea trade, the priority for Iran to strengthen the land routes and for Iran's partners has increased dramatically. You hear that, you see it a lot in Iranian media already, and the government is moving in that direction.
I kept seeing people talk about these free phones from AirTalk, so I gave it a try, and they really delivered it to my house. I'm not even playing.
Do you think that a new security architecture is shaping, considering Eurasia? Because we had Iranian foreign minister going to China, then Vladimir Putin. Right now, China is gonna go to North Korea, and there's some rumors. They're talking about the new security architecture of Eurasia, which the Middle East, I would say, the West Asia would be part of it, or what's going on in the Persian Gulf. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, maybe Pakistan. I don't know Turkey, how Turkey is playing right now. Well, how do you see that? Is that far from being achieved, or it's going to be something that is workable for the time being?
It's difficult to say in at least for our part of the world. I mean, Pakistan and Turkey are very close to Trump. And Turkey is, of course, NATO. And so its interests are in line with Trump's interests. The Pakistani government has good relations with China, but we know the internal politics of Pakistan. And so it is close to the United States. The countries in the Persian Gulf, they are bound to the United States. Jordan plays a very ugly role in all of the wars. I mean, it is, seriously a tool. I mean, just simply a tool of the CIA and Mossad in our part of the world. Whether it's in the dirty wars or in the wars against Iran, or it's, whatever the Israelis need, they'll get it from the Jordanian regime. But these countries in the Persian Gulf, they're all bound to the United States. I can't envisage them easily moving away. Their families have interest in the United States and in the West. That's where they're educated. That's where probably they have lots of Epstein videos. There are probably lots of Epstein videos of the princes and the princesses and the elites there. I mean, imagine. And it's something that people should be very careful of, especially pro-Palestinian activists. They should be very careful about these things. I'm sure that the Mossad and the CIA and the Western intelligence agencies, MI6 and others, MI5, they're out there to get dirt on people. But in any case, these regimes are deeply bound to the West, and I can't really envisage them. I can understand them moving to improve relations with China, with Russia, with Iran, but up to a point. Up to a point. I don't see them, because they're proxies. They're bound to the West. So unless there's upheaval and change, which is quite possible, especially if there's war, then that would change the equation. But I do believe we are moving towards change, whether anyone likes it or not. The balance of power, this war has changed the global balance of power. And again, if we go back to what Robert Kagan wrote, I think this is not some, no minority view. I mean, when the godfather of the neocons acknowledges this is the greatest defeat of the United States ever. And it's going to have a huge impact. And these countries in the region, their importance is decreased a lot. The countries in the Persian Gulf, they're not what they were, 3 months ago. or at least what they imagine themselves to be. It's never going to be like before. They made a big mistake. They made a catastrophic mistake. A criminal, what they did was criminal and barbaric, but it was a major, major miscalculation. They misread the situation. And so I think that the region is going to change, but I don't think it's going to be, I don't think they want to be a part of a non-American project. I mean, Turkey, I mean, Erdogan has been in power in Turkey for God knows how long, and over 2 decades. And he's still in NATO. He hasn't budged, and he's transporting oil to Netanyahu throughout the genocide, throughout the wars. We shouldn't be naive about these things. Some, I doesn't reflect upon the people of Turkey. No one. Sometimes some of my Turkish friends say, "Why are you, so critical of Turkey?" I'm not critical of Turkey. I mean, I've been told by a non-Kuwaiti, a Westerner in Kuwait, that during the war, Kuwaitis were cheering for Iran. Not like a minority in Kuwait. Kuwaitis, I was told, were cheering for Iranians. Now, what he said is based on his own anecdotal. He's in Kuwait, or at least he was in Kuwait. I don't know about right now, but maybe from his anecdotal experience. But it's not a huge country. But he was saying that people were so. It doesn't. I'm not, when I say the Kuwaiti regime, I'm not talking about the population. We know that these regimes are police states, and so popular opinion in the Emirates, I have no doubt that ordinary Emiratis are against the Israeli regime. I have no doubt about that. But it is a police state, and it's very tightly controlled. In Turkey, you see like people come to the streets and to support the Palestinians. People are unhappy about the trade relations, but Turkey is still in NATO.
You look great. What is your secret? I got my kids a simple driver's ed. Well, the secret.
NATO.
Just moments ago, we've learned that Israel is bombing the southern part of Lebanon again and again and again, each and every day. They're killing civilians. And the same thing has happened yesterday and the day before in Syria as well. What is the position of Turkey? Is that going to bring, because Turkey has a lot to do with the case of Syria. We know that Iran is concerned about the people in Syria and with the case of Lebanon. Is that going to bring Turkey and Iran to the same sort of, some sort of understanding with Israeli objectives? Because they're attacking each and every country in that region. And it doesn't seem that in a long run they can continue this way, and Turkey is gonna are they concerned about Syria? The people, I'm talking about the people in Syria, or all they care about the government, to keep the government in its position?
Well, if Ankara was to change policy, Iran would cooperate. The problem is not in Tehran, it's in Ankara. So they are concerned, but they're bound to the West. The elites, they're bound to the West. And they work in line with broader Western objectives. As we speak, again, they're transporting Baku oil to Netanyahu. You would imagine that Turkey would have broken off relations over the last 2.5 years, even political relations. They refused to do that. Iran encouraged them to do that. They refused. And when these countries in our region refuse to do that sort of thing, it makes it much more difficult to convince other countries outside of the region, in Africa and Latin America and Asia, to do the same. You first have to do it yourselves. But none of these countries made any move. Syria is the result of the coming to power of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria, is exactly what Iran and Hezbollah was saying would happen. Should anyone be surprised that Jolani is obedient to the United States? If Jolani was, it was only about jihad and all the billions of dollars were pouring in, and the ISIS and the Al Qaeda head choppers, as some would call them, they're all being funded only until now. Now, where's the funding? Where's the support? Why don't they continue to fund these people so that they can take back southern Syria? As Hezbollah's fighting, this is the best time for the Syrians to fight for their territory, because the Israelis would be overwhelmed. They're fighting, they can't defeat Hezbollah, and if the Syrians, which are a much larger country, were to open a front, then the Israelis would be in a lot of trouble. They're not going to do that. That was never the plan. Those people who promoted the blessed revolution, they're always working for the CIA, knowingly or otherwise. They're always working for the Mossad. Even those who are pro-Palestinian, they're always working for the Mossad, wittingly or unwittingly. Some wittingly, some unwittingly. They're always on the Qatari money, and we all knew it. This was never about Assad. They like to say it that way in order to muddy the waters. From the very beginning, it was clear what this was all about. It was to break the axis of resistance so that the Israelis could defeat the Palestinians, so that the Israelis could have more ease in its expansionist policies. If they were sincere, they should defend their territory now. They were all about jihad, whatever that means. And of course, jihad for us is very different from the jihad of the ISIS and Al Qaeda terrorists backed by the CIA. We have our worldview is, for us. I was just saying the other day to someone. I said, from our religious and ideological perspective, if the Jews in Israel were in Gaza, and the Palestinians were in control of Palestine, and they were doing to the Jews in Gaza what the Zionists are doing today to the Palestinians, Iran's policy would be to support the Jews in Gaza. It would be just as it is now. Why? Because that is the moral position.
Welcome to the new generation of web creation.
To take. And supporting the empire, or working to strengthen the empire, pushing the policies of the empire, are immoral. Iran's support for the Syrians was because it knew that ISIS and Al Qaeda is to the benefit of the United States, and it is to the detriment of the Palestinian people and people across the region. But if right now Jolani decided to shift policy and say, I'm going to defend my territory, the first country to come to his aid would be Iran. It would be Hezbollah that sends its advisors there to help him. It would be the resistance in Iraq that volunteers. And no one else would help him. Have no doubt. All those billions of dollars that came in to create this dirty war to destroy Syria, none of that will come in. Just as it's not being given to them now, it won't come in. If somehow miraculously Jolani decided that he'd be the anti-Jolani, he will be independent of the empire. The first to support him would be Iran and Hezbollah and resistance. They would be there immediately. They would give him whatever he needs to liberate the country. But that was never the intention in the first place. And I think people have woken up to that. Those who still close their eyes, they know why they're closing. It's because they're on the payroll. It's because of sectarian blindness, a disease in itself. The disinformation that they spread out every day is it shows why that disinformation is. It's obvious why it's being spread, because they have to keep the waters muddy. Because if the water is not muddy, then everyone will see more clearly what's happening. But people are seeing much more than before.
I don't know if
Turkey if it's in its interest to join Iran, but it's for Ankara to make that decision. If Ankara had joined Iran, if it joins Iran today, it would be horrible for the Israeli regime.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen. Not under Erdogan.
No.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
That's something I never understood. Why is that? I think I see no reason for Iran and Turkey not to participate, not to cooperate, not to.
Well, because Western intelligence agencies, they helped Mr. Erdogan. They helped him, and Turkish intelligence at that time, they helped him. The Islamic movement in Turkey under Najmuddin Erbakan was a very different thing, and they were able to change the course of much of the movement in a way in which someone or people much less threatening to the empire came to power. But if the original, if someone like Najmuddin Erdogan was able to gain power and he was removed through a coup, but if he was able, or someone like him was able to gain power in Turkey, we would have a very different Turkey today, and the Israelis would be in a lot of trouble. So it's not as if Turkey is like this. It's just like Jordan. Do you think like ordinary Jordan, and the Jordanian regime is a horrible proxy regime, but do you think Jordanians are happy about it? No, of course
not. Yeah. Professor Mann, before wrapping up, we've learned in the last 2 days more than 36 tankers passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Who are these countries that are getting their tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz? And are they paying directly to Iran? Are they communicating? How is the payment system? Is that in Iranian rial? Is in America? Is in Chinese yuan or something else? How is that working?
they all pay, and there are different means to have it done. It can be done in different ways. There's not a single method, but all of them they belong to countries that are not showing hostility towards Iran. That's the key point. Remember, as I said on multiple occasions, Iran never, at any point, closed the Strait of Hormuz. Never. Only those countries that were hostile towards Iran, that helped the United States murder Iranian kids in Minab, to murder our leader, to bomb gymnasiums where those girls were playing volleyball and they massacred all of them. I think it was in a city in the south of Iran. Lar, maybe, I'm not sure, but I should remember these things. But I mean, they carried all sorts of atrocities, and which is unforgivable. And it's not the first time that they've done this. They helped ISIS and Al Qaeda. Before that, they helped Saddam Hussein invade Iran. But countries that were friendly to Iran, it was never close to them, and the ships that pass through, they pay a fee. There are different mechanisms and ways to do it, or different there are different ways which that fee can be paid. But they are countries that have some sort of friendly relationship with Iran. They're not implicated in the war. The goods may have been from like these 5 countries in some cases. They were purchased and they're stuck in the Persian Gulf. They're facilitating their departure.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
It's a great pleasure.
To weaken and destroy Russia. Whether you say it's misplaced, exaggerated, it is beside the point. That is how Russia sees the picture. This is the psychology. And that is what was disturbing Professor Karaganov, because he said, if they don't fear our nuclear weapons, then they will go on ratcheting and ratcheting up until we are at war. So we have to bring back a certain degree of fear. That's why there is that sort of paradox, as I called it, or the oxymoron, of actually a nuclear fear can be the source of stability, particularly at a time when arms control has largely disappeared. All that, we talk about arms control, but it's meaningless. I mean, it hasn't been in existence for a long time because it didn't suit the United States to go on with arms control because they wanted to pursue a conventional war through Ukraine against Russia. In that way, then the arms control limitations would continue even as they were pursuing that war. And just take an example of this. This was very apparent. You remember when there was that spiderweb attack on Russia's strategic nuclear aircraft on the tarmac. They were there because of the SALT Treaty. They are supposed to hold their strategic bombers out in the open so that satellites, American satellites, can verify that they're still there and something hasn't changed. So they're kept out in the open. And that was the basis of that attack. It failed. It didn't work. It went wrong. But they had all of these containers and these vans brought into Russia with sliding roofs so that the missiles could be fired from the vehicles and hit the strategic nuclear force of Russia. Why would the United States think that this was a good idea? Because clearly it wouldn't have happened without the United States support. Why did they think if it was a good idea to attack its strategic nuclear power? Why would they have attacked in Voronezh, if you like, with their ATACMS, which is where Russia has its over-the-horizon radar systems at Voronezh. These are over-horizon about intercontinental war. They're not anything to do with Ukraine whatsoever. These are the radars that are to give early warning of a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. Why attack those? Why attack the nuclear strategic bomber? Now, you can say, oh, don't take it seriously, it's not so important. But I mean, if you're sitting in Russia and Moscow and you understand the significance of this, you will say, are the Americans, moving towards preparing for the idea? They've already said publicly, the official responsible for it, that they believe America can win a nuclear exchange with Russia. And then that attack on Valdai, the Valdai compound, that also happens to be, if you like, the center, the control center, an underground bunker control center. It has the house of Putin there too, but it also is the command center for nuclear forces in the event of an exchange with another adversary.
I'd like you to, because I think that you said something a minute ago that I think is so important for us to understand. We think Russia would never do this because they say Article 5, 32 NATO countries against one Russia. They would never survive that, so they never will. So we can do those things safely. But I want you to help us to understand the Russian mentality as exposed by Professor Karaganov, as you mentioned here, because he said one interesting thing I found very interesting from your article. This is what you put in there that he wrote: the use of nuclear weapons is a great sin, but the de facto refusal to use them is an unforgivable, deadly, and criminal sin because it paves the way for expansion and escalation of the world war unleashed by the West. If it is not stopped, it will most definitely lead to the destruction of humanity, including our own country. Vladimir Putin's question: and what is the point of a world without Russia remains relevant. So when he says using nuclear weapons is a sin, but not using them is a greater sin, to what extent does that, impose on Putin's thinking, and how widespread is that in Russia?
Well, first of all, I mean, what he said too, and this is important to understand because this directly affects particularly Europe. And he said, listen, we must understand the lesson from Iran, how the Iranians have used conventional weaponry, missiles, carefully chosen on vulnerable assets of the United States and Israel and the Gulf states. And that caused them to retreat. That brought a retreat. And so what he's saying is the first layer has to be conventional, Oreshniks. And he says we must build a range of missile capabilities for the future, Oreshniks, Bereshniks, all of these things for conventional power. But at the back of it always has to be some sense of real fear that there is ultimately, if none of those things work, the nuclear. I mean, the absolute last resort is a nuclear use. But to rule out or to allow that deterrence to fall away, to come into a disuse, is a danger. And I happen to think also that actually it is in a European interest for Russia to have a deterrence, because otherwise we will slowly, step by step, end up possibly in a major war with Russia by these little steps that Europe is taking every time. You know, first of all, it was drones, then it's ATACMS. They wanted to use Tomahawk missiles. Now they are using massive drones that are made in Britain, made in France. The actual drones or assembled in Ukraine, but made in Britain. These are British, if you like. Who's behind the plan? And this is why I'm saying it goes back to the decision makers. Who is behind this plan to do this escalation, to use the Baltics and Finland? You know, the Baltics are just, you know, minor in this. The big question that Russia is looking at, who is the decision makers? And the decision makers are in Germany and in Britain and in France that are planning this slow escalation. You know what it's called. This is what the Russians think is happening, is that we are trying to boil the frog. You know the story. You boil the frog, you put the frog into cold water, and as you slowly increase the heat, after, you know, degree by degree, in the end, the frog dies. And so they think that this, what is happening is a sort of boiling the frog exercise of escalation, small escalations. And so I think if this goes on, this is just my personal view, but if it goes on, I think there will be a reaction against the decision makers who are behind it. I mean, we know quite clearly it's not a surprise. They've already said this. And we don't know, I mean, exactly I don't know where the missiles launched from, but Naryshkin has said that they are actually that the Ukrainians are in Latvia with these drones. I don't know. Naryshkin is the head of the intelligence service, so he probably has quite good information. But even if they're not, it's not so much what's happening in the Baltic states. I mean, and there are, you know, threats to go to the Kaliningrad peninsula or anything like that. They have to, as they see it, have to send a painful and clear message to decision makers. Those decision makers are largely in Europe. It's European driven, this move towards war with Russia. But just like as we've heard about, the war on Iran, the question is, why would it be in a European interest to go to war with Russia? What for? How could it be in a European interest? Well, it has been a European interest for a long time. From, the war Europe has been fighting Russia. From Germany, it was from Napoleon, from Germany. Britain was the only one who was not, but Russia had almost the entire of Europe fighting it in the Second World War. And, they don't intend to be boiled in the pot. So they are looking for ways, conventional ways, like the Iranians have done, to send a very clear message, that in that case, sending a message to Washington saying, look, pull back, because otherwise we will escalate and it will be extremely damaging for our economies, your economies, the world economy. And if you don't listen to the message, draw back, pull back from this exercise in Iran, and pull back from this attempt to slowly escalate into something much more serious across Europe.
Let me ask you a little follow-up question on what you just said there, because I hear what you're saying about why, because the obvious question that any normal person would ask was, why would the West, Europe, US want to do this boil the frog thing to try and move closer to a conflict with Russia, when Russia clearly does not pose a conventional threat to attack the West on their own initiative? So there is nothing to deter or limit from coming from them. But as you pointed out, you went back to Napoleon to Hitler, etc. There seems to be this long-standing desire in the current form, because we've seen World War I and World War II and the massive destruction, and now with the destruction power profoundly higher, any third attempt would be massively more in casualties for Europe. What is animating the individual today to even want to play with a boil the frog theory?
Well, because, you ask a very complex question, but really it goes back to things that have happened in the past. It was called the Pale of Settlement, and it led to a huge immigration. First of all, to a radicalization of population that were in these pales of settlement, which were mostly in Poland, led to quite a radicalization in the Pale of Settlement, and many of those people arrived in America, but also many of them went to Palestine, to Israel, and many came to Europe, and those people were part of a generation of young people who were radicalized, really radicalized, against the Tsar and against the government in Russia. From the 1860s onwards, it became, the younger generation rose up against their parents, essentially, and became Trotskyists and became Bolsheviks, and were throwing, nail bombs into cafes in Russia. But then Stalin came and repressed it, and, if you like, sent people to the camps in Siberia. And there's a huge anger and resentment for what they call pogroms and pogroms before. I'm not saying there weren't pogroms, but many of them were not. The pogroms that took place or claimed to take place in Ukraine, many of them were actually done by the Greeks, who resented competition and things in these areas. So there's a sort of deep history of desire for revenge for what happened during the Stalin period and after the Bolshevik Revolution, and so this has been long-standing, and Europe financed the Bolshevik Revolution. European banks financed the Bolshevik Revolution. They financed the war against Russia, the Japanese war that defeated Russia. They financed the Ukrainian, if you like, war against Russia. And ultimately, this is at the forefront of the screen for many Russians. They see this and understand it. It's not sort of our take on the world, and we say, well, is it real? Is it something that we should take seriously? Well, I think we should take it very seriously. I've always felt, that the most important thing in geopolitics, which I try to practice too, is to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see the world not just from your vision, not from the inside, but from the outside. So the huge change that can take place politically and in geopolitical understanding is when suddenly for a moment you see actually the inside has an outside and the outside is a different view. And that if you've got to understand that to find a solution to the apparent contradiction of holding opinions and views that are facets that are completely contradictory.
And as long as we fail to do that, I mean, you have all kinds of problems because we live in this, I don't know about in Europe as much, at least in the United States, we live in this almost like a virtual reality. We program in what the other side is, and then we wear these goggles and we don't even see what really is going on, which has pretty bad consequences.
So this is, and the consequences could be very serious with this. If we ignore what, and you said, is the paper by Karaganov serious? Yes, I'm trying to say to you, this is, yes, when he first started talking about this nuclear issues, it was considered to be a little bit out of an outlier. It is now dead central. This is the thinking. This is why the Russians have just had a major nuclear. This is the first step. A major, look at it. It's been a massive demonstration of nuclear power that has taken place. People will say to you, oh, was it probably scheduled a year ago? No, it was put on particularly now to say to the West, don't forget, we are a nuclear power. And if you think you can just ignore this by going on sort of bit by bit, dissecting us and taking us to pieces, continuing to use Ukraine as a battering ramp to destroy Russia. And what that's saying is, Europe is using Ukraine to prevent a settlement. I think that was so obvious during that period when Witkoff and Kushner were going back and forwards. I mean, every time, the Europeans would call a meeting and then they bring Zelensky in and say, no, we can't have this. We can't have this at all. They have to continue. There can't be anything. There can't be a settlement. There can only be an unilateral ceasefire. That's all that is acceptable. And it didn't resolve the issues. The issue fundamentally about Ukraine is the same one. It's Russian security. They need to know what is the limit of NATO's, if you like, where is the border of NATO? How far does NATO extend? And to say on the other side, this is Russia, China's Asian frontier. We have to have some understanding. NATO goes on, expanding, taking different views. And the Russians are saying, we have to halt this. We have to have a serious discussion. So Karaganov's final point, is something very simple. We have to talk about this. We have to talk about, again, which we don't do and haven't done for some time. We have to talk about understanding each side's perspective on the nuclear issue and on conventional weapons. It may not end up in a treaty, but something needs to be managed. There needs to be someone who possibly is even someone with some weight or standing in their society that can come and say, This is how we need to understand each other. Let's have some sort of entente.
Gary, if I could get you to pull that previous headline back up there, the one you just had about Putin will only use it as a last resort. That I think is more important than it appears at face value. I'd like your view on this. I know we're just about running out of time here, but taking a look at what this headline is here, reading it from Western eyes, Putin says only use nuclear weapons would be a last resort. So when we hear that, we think, oh, well, and unless we attack them first, then they're not going to use nuclear weapons. So we don't have to worry about it, all this kind of stuff. But it depends on the definition of last resort. You said a second ago, you got to look at the other side and think the way they do. We're thinking the way we do. But here is Karaganov. I perceive, and you tell me if you think I'm wrong, I perceive he's putting that definition of last resort in a different context. Here he is with Glenn Deason.
We have restored our soul and our honor. We have started to value those people in our society, which are truly valuable, meritocratic elites, scholars, doctors, officers. The country is becoming more healthy. But for that, we're paying for too many bodies. So my advice to my government is that we should stop this war, at least in Europe, by going up the ladder of escalation, first attacking by conventional weapons symbolic or logistical points on European soil. We do not need an inch of Europe, as you might understand. And then if they do not succumb, we should follow with nuclear strikes, relatively massive, with, of course, offering some kind of ultimatum. If they do not succumb, some of the countries of Europe should perish.
Still catching up on your admin from last year? Get back on track of your business finances with Xero. With Xero, your invoices and payment reminders are sent automatically. You can reduce your average payment time by weeks. Xero syncs with your bank, payment processors, and business apps. All of your financial data is organized and updates automatically in one place, saving you time and hassle. It's time to change the way you manage your business accounting. Sign up for Xero today and free up your time for the things that matter the most.
Now, whether Putin holds that view or not, I don't know. But when he says last resort, that means we'll fire conventional weapons at these points because of all the things that have happened in the last 4+ years. So when he says last resort, that seems to be different than what Americans are thinking. How do you see that contrast?
I mean, he puts it in the context of we need to learn the lessons from Iran. Iran used not necessarily the most powerful conventional weapons, but conventional weapons to send a very clear message, striking at a vulnerable asset, but not destroying everything. To send a message clearly and saying retreat. And largely the West did retreat. And he is, Karaganov is saying very much the same message, is saying, look, we've tried it verbally and said to, we put statement after statement out saying we won't accept this. And people say, oh, it's bluff. We don't pay any attention. We won't pay any attention. We'll just continue. We'll continue on soldiering. And he's saying, if they don't stop, if they don't hear that we do have limits, that there are boundaries that you cannot cross. And if you cross those boundaries, first of all, we will deliver a pointed message in terms of a conventional weapon. If it goes on and you don't pay any attention, we may then use a tactical weapon to underline the last resort is that we are a nuclear power. I'm not trying to present the Russian case. I underline I'm presenting the European case because I'm presenting the case that Europe actually has no interest in going down this route. It should actually come to some understandings about where the limits of security lie. Where are the limits of NATO action? Where are the limits that China and Russia and Iran can pretend to? If without that, I mean, it becomes chaotic and it becomes unmanageable and can easily deteriorate. We have no interest in sort of pushing this to the limit. Now, Karaganov clearly, and I say I've discussed it with him, he is creating a psychological atmosphere, but a real one. He's creating a psychological atmosphere. He believes it's important that Americans and Europeans understand that a deterrence is deterrent and it has to deter. If it doesn't deter, it's a waste of time. And so he's trying to underline the importance that for Russia, nuclear power is seen as a major deterrent.
And just final question here. What is your best assessment for how close we are if Putin would do it, not Karaganov, but Putin would say, all right, it's crossed my red line. Europe has apparently no intention of changing anything that they've been doing for the last 4.5 years. That Putin would say, all right, that's it. We're going to try the Karaganov method, conventional missiles at various sites in Europe. How close do you think we are to that?
Quite close, if this escalation goes on. I mean, how many missiles? First of all, it was Ukraine threatening the 9th of June victory celebrations in Moscow with a massive attack, which then Putin spoke to Trump, and Trump got it called off. And then we had a massive drone attack on Moscow, probably the one that was intended for the 9th of June, which was pulled back on Moscow. This is, so yes, it didn't happen on the 9th of June. They just saved it up and did it a few days later. Either the Europeans pull back the Ukrainians on this and say, no, here are the guidelines. We have to manage this. You can't simply just escalate and escalate and escalate with drones and as I underline, these drones are storm shadows. And drones, they are cruise missiles produced. They may be transshipped to Ukraine in crates and put together again in Ukraine. But fundamentally, these are European weapons being used directly on Russia. You can't get around that. These are European weapons facilitated and assisted to strike deep into Russia. How long does Russia put up with that? I don't think it'll go on forever putting up with that. I think it's been pretty patient so far. And as a European, I think we should respect that deterrence. And I think that deterrence is actually something that serves us, because we don't want the frog to get boiled.
Indeed we don't. You couldn't put it any better myself. Thank you so much for coming on today, Alistair, and really laying this out in honest way. Just remind people to go and read this whole article on the Conflicts Forum. There's the address you see on the screen, conflictsforum.substack.com, and read all this stuff, because there's constant new material we put out there. So thank you very much, Alistair. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Coffee. Follow me.